I'm in the Netherlands on a work trip, and in the evening, I find myself alone in a hotel with nothing to do. Like any self-respecting gay man, reading or watching TV seems like pretty unedifying pastimes when you've got free time. So why not compulsively throw myself onto Grindr for hours and maybe risk my life meeting some weirdo? I started chatting with this cute, nice young guy. He lives fairly far from my hotel, so we decided to meet halfway to get to know each other. 5 kilometers on foot, which I happily do because I like walking around new cities. Not knowing the local geography, I imagined pubs and bars, and instead I find myself in a rather lonely, gloomy part of town. We meet, and he's actually much better looking than in the photos. But if on chat he was friendly and nice, in person he seems pretty reserved and unsociable, which I chalk up to Dutch stiffness. I talk to him and he replies in monosyllables with no engagement whatsoever. The emotional and physical affective deprivation my parents raised me with has produced me, an insecure egocentric who has to be liked by the other person at any cost. If he likes me, my unconscious suggests I'll heal my narcissistic wound and finally be worthy of my mom's love. I perform my personal mating dance. He's sufficiently smitten. Out of nowhere, he invites me to his place, and I accept. We get to his place, another 5 kilometers away, right in the countryside, and my phone stops getting a signal. I don't know if it's a lack of coverage or if I just ran out of credit. The house is nothing like I imagined. It looks like the house of an old lady who collects doilies. He tells me the villa we're in was actually inherited from his grandmother, and he's been living there alone for several years. He shows me what he's cooking in the kitchen, a nauseating, watery stew that I hope he won't offer me. He takes me into the living room. We sit on the couch and he loosens up a bit. Between one chat and another, he tells me he's a fashion designer and that he produces the fabrics he uses himself with the help of a 3D printer, a super innovative technique. I tell him I know a Dutch designer who uses the same technique. Her name is Iris van Herpen. Pause. He starts foaming at the mouth. He begins telling me that this very Van Herpen stole his ideas and he wants to sue her. He pulls out DVDs of his fashion shows and comments on every single piece, meanwhile showing me YouTube videos of the established designer's shows with the supposed copies of his work. If Van Herpen's models look like ethereal, graceful works of art walking down the runway, his models wearing his creations look like runaway girls on the third walk of shame of the week. I don't tell him this, and on the contrary, I nod along sympathetically to his megalomaniac statements. As I resign myself to the idea that nothing's going to happen, he kisses me, one of the worst kisses of my life, surely a harbinger of far worse performances. I try to guide him and improve things, but nothing. He just can't do it. Like your grandpa when you try to teach him how to use email. He stops and he tells me he'll be right back. He goes upstairs to the second floor. 10 minutes go by and he's still nowhere to be seen. I approach and shout, "Hey, everything okay?" "Yes, of course," he says. Could it be that he wants me to go upstairs and I'll find him naked, bent over? I ask him, "So, should I come up?" To which he just says, No, wait." I wait. Another 20 minutes pass. Is he taking a shower? Yet I don't hear any water running. After a while, much darker possible scenarios start to crowd in. Ones anyone with a bit of common sense would think of if they found themselves in an isolated stranger's house. Is he putting on a raincoat to protect himself from the blood once he chops me up? Is he sharpening an awl with which to carve red rum into my belly after chaining me to the fireplace? I decided to make a run for it. If the idea of being murdered by a stranger has just barely surfaced, the doubt turns into certainty when I realize that the door we came in through is locked. Oh my God, I'm going to die. I go to the kitchen where there's another door, and that one's locked too. Oh crap. I go back to the living room and meanwhile scan the place for possible escape routes. In a dramatic flash forward, I picture myself throwing an armchair through a window and then jumping out and running away, or finding a flashlight in the bookcase to send Morse code distress signals. After about 50 minutes, he comes back downstairs impassive. "I want to have sex with you," he adds without any emotion. I've completely lost the desire. I'm genuinely convinced he's going to kill me. I tell him that I have to go home and that it's late. He replies that I can't go home now. He wants to fuck. I tell him he took too long and that I have to go back to my hotel, which is 10 kilometers away, and it's pitch dark by now. He sighs. I ask him to let me connect to his Wi-Fi since my phone has no signal, so I can follow the route on Google Maps. He points to a modem blinking under a chair. The password's underneath. I crouch down to look for the password on the sticker on the back of the modem. After a few seconds, I realized I'm bent over with him behind me. While trying to type the password, I keep glancing at him as he watches me slyly from the couch. My hands are shaking. At a certain point, I see him lean forward from the couch to grab something behind a piece of furniture, an object I can't see, and that I decide it must be a weapon to knock me out. I jump up, grab a lamp, brandishing it, then telling him, "Let me out of here." He looks at me surprised. "If you want to go, go." I tell him that the door's locked. He looks astonished at this statement. "Follow me," he says. I'm now certain I'm going to die. I keep the lamp with me. He looks at me impassively, as if this were practically normal. I follow him and we go into the kitchen where the nauseating stew reigns supreme, and he tells me the keys are there. The light in the room is off. He walks in without turning it on and opens a drawer, and I clearly hear the clinking of cutlery. Oh my God! He wants to attack me with a kitchen knife! I suddenly turn on the light and keep brandishing the lamp. He looks at me coldly and takes the keys from the cutlery drawer. We head toward the door, and as soon as I'm outside, I run like hell, all while the lamp is still in my hand. It takes me 2 hours to get back to the hotel. As soon as I enter my room, I open my laptop, and since his first and last name were visible in the fashion show he tortured me with, I block him on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. Years later, this encounter unsettles me so much that every now and then I Google the city name, fashion designer, and killer, sure that sooner or later he'll kill someone. I'm left with 2 questions. What did he do alone on the 2nd floor for 50 minutes? Was he actually preparing the post-coital crime scene? Did he take Viagra and wait for it to kick in? What was he trying to grab from behind the piece of furniture? A weapon? A portable Wi-Fi hotspot for my dead phone? A dildo? Unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever know. Back in late 2023, I began seeing a man in my neighborhood walking his dog. I would see him in the morning when I went to work, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. He's an average-looking guy, maybe in his 60s. I would see him again regularly when I came home. Since I worked an 8 to 5, I didn't think much of it, just assumed we had similar schedules. He always wore the same blue jacket. I didn't think much of it because it looked like a rain or wind jacket, so I thought it was just what he threw on to walk the dog. He would stare a lot when he walked by, but again, assumed maybe he was just a lonely guy and didn't think too much of it. One day I asked him if he had got the end of the year letter from the HOA, and he seemed confused. I repeated myself, and he said that he hadn't received anything yet. Wrote this off as well because I assumed that he was just caught off guard. I had been seeing him daily for months, but we never spoke. He genuinely seemed shocked by me speaking to him. I told him to keep a lookout for it, and he just stared and went back to walking his golden retriever. I began seeing him even more after this. By Christmas, I was seeing him at least once a day, if not twice. I treated him like every other neighbor, and did a quick neighbor wave whenever I saw him walking his dog. In March, I had separated from my husband. He moved out and took the dog. He owned him before I came along, so I understood this. Since I was now alone and sad, my mom stayed with me for a while. She doesn't work, so she would be at my house during the day while I was gone. She noted the same guy always walking by. She noticed that he always stared too, and it was kind of odd. She waved hello to him a few times, but he never did anything but just stare and walk his dog. She said since he walked the dog often, but also seemingly on a schedule, he could have early onset dementia, or maybe he was sick somehow and using the dog walks as a way to get exercise. We both agreed he was very odd but harmless. After a month or so, my mom went back to her house and I was living alone. One thing I loved about that house was the fact that the backyard butted up to a national park. Beyond my fence was trees and forest. After my husband and dog left, I would be sitting in the backyard and hear what sounded like footsteps. It was almost always late at night when I'd be sneaking out for a late night cigarette before bed. I was drinking a good amount at the time, so I figured 1, I was paranoid, and 2, I was probably hearing raccoons or opossums in the woods, and 3, having the dog before would have scared off any critters. It didn't happen every night, far enough apart that I was able to write it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My fence had horizontal planks rather than your more standard vertical style. There were gaps you could see through if you were right on it. I looked over the fence in the daylight for a sign of anyone back there. The National Forest kept the fire break cleared between the edge of the park and the back of the homeowner's property, so it was difficult to tell if anyone had been there or not. I'd started noticing lighters and cigarettes missing from the backyard. I would swear I had an almost full pack going to bed, but when I'd check the next day, it would be half empty. I wrote this all off due to my heavy drinking. My cousin started coming over and helping me do some handiwork around the house on the weekends. The neighbor guy in the blue coat would walk his dog every day still. He would now stop and watch my cousins from the sidewalk as they did work at the house. He would let the leash out for the dog to come up to them, but they didn't pet it because it smelled awful. I told them the theory my mom said, that he was sick and weird, but harmless. They didn't agree, and the next time he let the dog into the driveway, my cousins had told him to screw off. From what they told me, he just stared at them for a while, then walked off. From then, the man would still stare, but it was even creepier now. When I would drive by, he would stop and watch me, as in physically turning his body to follow my car as I went by. I would always wave as if it were any other neighbor, as I always did, and he didn't flinch. Around June, a friend of mine moved in. She was going through a divorce as well, and I was happy to have someone to hang out with after work. We had a lot of fun drinking and burning fires in the fire pit. And it began again. The sound of footsteps in the woods. We were both drunk, so we ran inside and just laughed it off. This happened a handful of times over the next few months. I would hear things more often when I was alone. My roommate split her time, so she was never with me on the weekend. She had noted the creepy guy with his dog. He seemed to be walking his dog when I left for work, around 7:30, and again when she was leaving for work, around 8:30. He would let his dog out to her daily, and she would pet the dog at first. She stopped because the dog smelled so bad and the man never spoke. He just stared. She started being creeped out too. She said he seemed friendly enough until she stopped petting his dog and his stare shifted to being mean too. He began stopping to watch her drive by as well. Then one day I saw it. I saw him down out past the entrance of the neighborhood and at the tree line to the forest. He was clearly walking into the woods. That's when it clicked. Why did he wear the same clothes every day? Why he seemed to be there with his dog every day we left the house? Why did they smell so bad? Why I was hearing things in the woods? I almost began to panic. Surely a man isn't living in the woods watching me, right? Surely this man hasn't been watching me through my fence for almost a year at this point. The whole time this was happening, the house next door was empty. It was a rental and the previous tenants left and it sat. I started thinking back, and I began seeing the man sometime after the previous tenants moved out. I tried my best not to panic and started looking into trail cameras to film behind my fence. I told my roommate about my theory, and she said I sounded crazy at first. She jokingly started yelling out for him to go away and leave us alone. Then we finally started hearing footsteps in the woods at that moment and then ran inside. Before I could even order a camera, they had rented the house next door. It was just days after I told my roommate what was going on. A family with a dog and 2 kids had moved in. The last time I saw the man walking his dog was the morning the family moved in, because I came home from work to see the moving truck. When I introduced myself to the neighbors, I had asked about the woods behind the house. They didn't have a fence. I asked if they found anything back there, and they said they did, but it was just random junk they threw out. I didn't say anything more. I really contemplated telling them, but I figured I would sound insane. I believe this man was living behind their house and watching me through my fence. I never had cameras in the backyard, so I can't say for certain if he ever crossed the fence. Since I never saw him again, I decided that his cover was blown and he had moved on to watch other people. I stayed in that home until October 2025. Literally never saw that guy ever again after that day. This is quite a long one, so apologies that it may take a while to tell. I do have to give a little bit of context also. I'm a 22-year-old female, but the story took place when I was 21. I live in a small town and I work in a pub in the town center. 2 pubs, 2 small shops, and a bank. On my walk home, I walk past one of the shops, which also has a small bus shelter next to it. Buses run every hour-ish, but none run after 8 p.m. After that, it's just residential housing and then my house near the end of the road. All in all, from my job and house, it's about an 8-minute walk. My town is usually dead after 10 p.m. as everything is closed, and I would genuinely say it was relatively safe. I never had a problem with walking home alone. This incident happened on New Year's Eve going into New Year's Day, so the pubs were open later. I finished my shift at about 1:30 a.m., and me and my boss, boyfriend, and 2 other coworkers went to the pub next door for a drink before we went home. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I realized what time it was and that I needed to get home. My boyfriend lives on the other side of town and I wasn't staying with him that night. My boss insisted on driving me home, and I kept insisting that he stay as everyone else was enjoying themselves and talking about the Christmas period we had at work. Same with my boyfriend. He insisted on walking me home, but I was adamant that I was fine, and it was literally less than 10 minutes. Anyway, after a lot of pushback, I told them I was walking home. I really enjoy walking without headphones, having a cigarette, especially after a shift, because it genuinely is so silent and peaceful. I didn't pass or see anybody until I got to walking past the shop. Like I mentioned previously, there's a small bus shelter next to it, and as I got closer, I realized there was a man sitting on the bench in the bus stop. Bear in mind, it is nearly 3 a.m., and even the pub we were at wasn't actually open anymore. They just let us in because we worked at the other pub. I didn't really think much of the man, but as I got closer, I realized I had served him at my shift earlier on in the night. He looked up as I was walking, and I realized he was sniffing some sort of drug from his keys, most likely cocaine. I didn't actually know who he was, and still don't, but he didn't seem threatening. He just looked like he was kind of chilling, I guess. Probably not the best choice of words. He did meet my eyes though, and I was actually walking past the bus shelter. He said something along the lines of, "Sorry, darling, do you have a lighter I can borrow?" I was smoking as I was walking, so he knew I would have one. I stopped and he was already walking towards me as I had, so I started digging one of the many lighters that I had out of my bag. I was fully intent on just letting him keep it. I'm not the type to stand with a 30-something-year-old man while he's lighting a cigarette. Then he had asked me for a cigarette, but I had just lit my last one, which I said. During this whole conversation, he was very close to me, but I was kind of frozen in place. I'd realized that I'd stopped and was standing with a man in a dead street where nobody was around. I was still in the part of town where there isn't housing for another couple of minutes, and if anyone had come out of the pub, I was too far away where they wouldn't have seen me. I just started mumbling something like, "Hey, just keep the lighter. I've got to go." But this man who I had only spoken to for about 20 seconds told me, "Wait, just stop a second." And when my feet had started to turn to walk away, I stopped again. Side note, I know I should have just walked away, but I thought maybe it was innocent enough, and I didn't want to give a reason to provoke him if I had just walked away from him. This time his demeanor switched, and he wasn't very polite to start with. But it's like him telling me to stop made him realize that I was a young woman walking alone at this time of night. I genuinely still get chills thinking about what he said. He looked me up and down, then he said, "You know, I've been real angry, and I've been waiting for someone to hurt all night. You shouldn't be walking around here alone." My legs literally turned to jelly at that moment. I didn't even know if my phone was in my pocket or in my bag. I looked around and then said, "I'm not alone. My boyfriend is waiting for me around the corner. I will be with him in a minute." Then smiled. Just a bare-faced lie. My boyfriend was still in the pub and had no clue that this interaction was going on. I thought maybe I should walk back and go back to the pub, but I just decided not to. My house is closer. The man smirked as if he knew I was chatting absolute bullshit, and he would walk with me to meet my boyfriend. There was no boyfriend waiting for me around the corner. I kept saying there was no need, but he was literally on my tail, rambling about how I don't understand him, I don't get it, I need to walk with him, that he wasn't going to hurt me. And this whole time I kept thinking he was going to grab my hair or pull me to the ground, and that any minute he was going to realize there was no boyfriend waiting for me. I ended up pulling my phone out of my pocket and it opened to our work group chat, and I just typed a message about a man walking with me, realizing my phone was on 2%, thinking that I just wanted someone to know what was happening. I didn't dare go to call my boyfriend. This guy had started mumbling about how I wasn't listening to him. By some miracle, when we turned around the corner onto my street, the guy didn't realize my boyfriend wasn't there, or maybe he did but didn't say anything. He did up his behavior though, and he started spewing the most perverted stuff to me, saying, "You're such a pretty young girl. I bet your boyfriend doesn't know how to handle you." The whole time I wasn't speaking, just speeding up and checking my phone discreetly. I realized that he was going to know where my house was, so I just thought, I'm going to have to pretend one of these houses are mine. Otherwise, I'll be leading him right to my house where my dad would be asleep at the back of the house, none the wiser. All of the houses on the street had a small gate and footpath leading to the door, so I chose a house with the light on and opened their gate. I turned to the guy and then said, "This is my place. See you later. And thanks for walking me." Then closed the gate behind me. I ran up to their door and shoved my key into the door that wasn't mine and prayed that this guy would leave and wouldn't wait for me to go inside the house. Thankfully, he didn't, and he started stumbling in the opposite direction back down the street away from where my actual house was. And what I thought was my only chance, I opened this gate and sprinted home. This guy clocked what I was doing instantly and started walking in my direction. By the time I got to my house, he had either not caught up quick enough or had given up. When I put my key into the door, I realized my dad had left his in the door internally, meaning I was locked out. I got my phone out and realized it had died by the time we were walking, so I just started banging on the door, and luckily, my dad let me in after a couple of minutes. And that was it. But it was absolutely terrifying. I haven't walked home alone since, and my boyfriend was so upset that he didn't push more and let him walk me home. Thankfully, I'm okay, and nothing physical happened to me.
Between 8th to 10th grade, I was deeply involved in a small Minecraft building server. The average age of the players was probably 15 to 17 years old, and we Skyped almost every day for hours. We quickly grew close and would follow each other on other social media platforms. I became really close with one member in particular. His name was Peter. He was in the same grade as me, and I heard rumors that he might have had a crush on me. Rumors that he denied. I found the idea laughable, since we only knew each other online. We were in the same grade, but not in the same school, so I brushed it off, and things were okay for a while. But eventually something felt off. During our conversations, I started catching him in small lies, which bothered me. Deciding it was time to distance myself, I stopped talking to him. A few months later, after no contact, Peter texted me out of the blue. He said that he might transfer to my high school to qualify for an in-state college tuition. His plan was to live alone and support himself while still in high school. My stomach dropped. This felt very wrong and out of nowhere. Still trying to stay calm, I told him that his plan was absolutely insane and pointed out how oddly convenient it was that he just happened to choose the school that I attended. But he insisted that this was a coincidence and that his plan would work. I really hoped that he was bluffing, just messing around. But a short time later, he claimed that he had already purchased plane tickets to visit my high school and stay in my town. Fear washed over me as I realized that Peter was serious and had an unhealthy attachment to me. He wasn't bluffing. To my horror, he posted a Snapchat photo from the airport. He asked me to meet up while he was in town, but I denied. Later on, his Snapchat account showed him touring my high school, taking videos and pictures, likely hoping that I would see them. Fortunately, I was home with pneumonia that day and didn't have to face him. Over the next few days, I was on edge, terrified that he would show up at my door. Luckily, he never figured out where I lived, and eventually he flew back home, abandoning his plan. Shockingly, the rest of our online group never thought his behavior was creepy. I felt like I was going crazy for finding it severely disturbing. I hoped my rejection of the meetup and continued silence would end things. But 2 years later, after I committed to my dream college, Peter popped up again. I had, foolishly, kept following him on social media to monitor if he was ever near me. Then I saw it, a photo of him posing in front of my college's library, captioned, "Transferring here is definitely the move." I don't know if he ever did, but I never ran into him on campus. A few months later, he found out that I had a boyfriend and contacted me on Skype for the first time in 2 years. "Do you think he's going to protect you?" Out of fear, I blocked him and unfollowed him on all social media. I admit that I made mistakes back then. I was young, scared, and surrounded by people telling me this wasn't a big deal. He hasn't tried to contact me since, but that doesn't mean he isn't still watching me. Over the weekend, I checked my Skype account for the first time in months. I had a contact request from the username Young Love Money. Curious, I added them to see more of their info. It didn't reveal much. Later that day, the account tried calling me. I didn't answer. I had zero desire to speak to someone I didn't know. Then the rogue account sent 5 messages. "Hey. How are you? You there? What's up? Hello?" Another call came through, then another, and another. The account kept changing its username as well. The calls came every 5 minutes or so. Soon, the messages turned angry and sexual. "What the fuck? How come you're not answering? I can't stop thinking about how I'm gonna fuck you. I want you to see what it looks like." There was more, but you get the idea. I blocked the user, but the calls and messages persisted from other accounts. I just ended up logging off my computer. My boyfriend was coming over that night, and I would deal with this later. Later on, my boyfriend and I went to my father's house to watch a football game with him and some other family members. He and my mother had split up some time ago. He now lives with my brother, his current wife, and her son. While I was there, I was now receiving nasty text messages on my phone. On the drive over, I had told my boyfriend what was going on with my Skype account, and I was now getting the same kind of messages on my phone. He suggested I call the number to see who picked up. I did, and here's where things get a bit fucked. My stepbrother's Skype started ringing. The mobile app has a distinct tone, so I knew right then and there he had been the culprit all along. He scrambled for his phone and stopped the call just as mine hung up. He then bolted upstairs and didn't come back down for the rest of the night. My stepbrother is a 29-year-old, 6'4", 260-pound, jobless man-child. He would always make me feel uncomfortable with his temper, space-invading habits, and inappropriate jokes at odd times. Now I was extremely nervous. I didn't want to tell my dad though, for fear of putting his marriage under strain. Plus, I kinda knew his mom would side with her son anyway and act like he had done nothing wrong. She's part of the reason he behaves this way. My real brother, who also lives there, has had some issues with him as well. But nothing ever gets done about it. My stepmother just laughs and says, "Oh, he's just giving you a hard time." Of course, my father is next to useless when it comes to this situation, which is super painful because my brother and I genuinely care about him a lot. My stepmother claims that her son has emotional issues and can't work because of his condition. I guess we're going to have to add only child syndrome to the DSM-5. Imagine being married to a woman who has a 29-year-old son who throws temper tantrums until he gets his way, and she always brushes it off like it's nothing. Now, hold on to your pants, because we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. There's more to this jigsaw puzzle. And if you're thinking that this is a story about my creepy stepbrother, you're only half right. The true horror of this story is my father's absolute failures, plural, when it comes to his relationships. My dad bends over backwards to avoid upsetting his wife, even at the expense of his own children. We had major issues with his last wife, the one he married after divorcing my mom. She turned out to be an attractive drug addict and a cheater. There was a time where he stopped seeing me because his wife was jealous of me. If she didn't want him to go somewhere, he would just stay home, and he would be upset with my brother and I if we complained about it in any way, accusing us of trying to wreck his new marriage. Once she was involved in a hit and run and claimed that I had borrowed her car and I was the one who did it. My father backed her up, telling me to stop lying and confess, but the police were able to prove that it was in fact her behind the wheel, not me. So yeah, my father is a bit of a fucking moron, and it took quite some time for our relationship to mend after that. My dad is fine with his current wife's son living there, because he's been sold on this condition from the start. Here is another fun fact. My father and my current stepmom were high school sweethearts once upon a time, and they were actually married before my dad met my mom when they were in their early 20s. Things didn't work out, and they ended up divorcing. 30 years later, they run into each other at a gas station and began dating again. They eventually remarried this past August. I actually get along with her quite well, and she is very good to my father. She just has a messed up son who's going to ruin everything. It's sad, but it is what it is. I'm not too worried for myself. I'm never alone with him, and I think this was a twisted game for my stepbrother's amusement. Like, haha, you don't know it's me. That was the initial plan anyway, until I caught him red-handed. I feel like he was using his Skype account to anonymously confess those things to me, and now I know he has had those thoughts. But I haven't heard from him since. Now whenever I visit my dad, he stays upstairs, never coming down. The holidays are going to be very awkward for us though. I don't want to exchange gifts or even be near my stepbrother at all. I've always found him creepy, but this was a whole new level of insanity. This is a story about learning things the hard way. You can roll your eyes and point out all the bad decisions I made, and you would be right. But I would argue that good decisions can only be made with the knowledge of bad experiences. Let me start from the beginning. I'm a female, and I once had a friend who I thought of as a brother, someone I could talk to and trust with my deepest secrets. I met him at school during a sports day in my 4th year of secondary school. We'll call him Joshua. It was the last day before the holidays. We hung out with a group of others. We were laughing and enjoying ourselves. Afterward, we exchanged Facebook info. He didn't message me until midway through the holiday break, just saying hi and checking in. I was quite a bit of a loner back then, and I hadn't had a real friend since primary school, so I was flattered. We started talking on a regular basis, Around this time, I was moving houses, and he mentioned that he only lived 10 to 15 minutes away, meaning that we could hang out sometimes. I was excited. I had never had a friend over before, so it felt like a new experience. A year later, we were best friends. We discovered our mutual interests, walked around town, went to movies, swam, shared secrets. We did everything. But this is where things take a turn for the worse. He wanted this to be something more, but I just didn't have those feelings for Josh. In fact, I had a boyfriend named Charlie, and Josh was aware of this. He insisted that Charlie didn't treat me right, that I wasn't meant to be with him, or was talking behind my back. When I asked for proof of this, he would go silent and not say anything. Hindsight is always 20/20, and looking back, I'm a bit embarrassed of the position that I put myself in. I admit that I friend-zoned Josh hard, and it was causing problems. But at the time I didn't seem to care that much, and in fact I found him to be annoying. He kept trying to join Skype calls I would have with Charlie, who I rarely got to speak to between his job and my studies. We usually declined Josh joining, and he would get upset, messaging me, "If you were really my friend, you would let me join," only to apologize 30 minutes later for being childish. All of my online friends, including Josh, knew that I was a big-time gamer. I recently started playing a new game that I didn't want to tell Josh about. Because of what was going on at the time, I didn't want him following me, even in cyberspace. He had done this twice before, always nagging me to play together. I found a great guild, raiding twice a week for a few hours, and things are going great. A week later, Josh found out through a mutual friend, signed up, and joined my guild. I knew it was him. He always used the same username. Apparently he was trash-talking me behind my back, harassing female members, and just generally annoying everyone. He thought everything he said was hilarious. Every other sentence was a bad reference. He would disrupt our raids by joining our voice channel and blasting loud music. He was eventually booted. Frankly, he got what he deserved. After he had been bad-mouthing me behind my back and deciding enough was enough, I called him on Skype and ended our friendship. He didn't take it well. He cursed me out, threatened to leak all my secrets to my friends, and said that he would ruin my life. I hung up, blocked him, and thanked God that he was gone. Or so I thought. I had forgotten that he knew where I lived. I've been avoiding him for a month, prioritizing time with my guild, and just not wanting to deal with him. 3 weeks after cutting him off, I noticed something disturbing. I'm a diagnosed insomniac, and sometimes I gaze at the street lamps outside. That's when I saw Josh standing under the street lamp closest to my house. My room has a balcony outside the window. It's easy to climb, with its ledges and pipes. I've even snuck down that way before. I usually kept my window open because my room is so warm at night. At the time, I didn't have a fan, and the AC unit was broken, but that week had been freezing, so the window was closed. 15 minutes later, I saw him approaching my house and started climbing. I was so grateful that I had closed the window that night. It would have been easy to slip through otherwise. I turned off my monitor and sat there in the dark, shaking, with my teeth chattering, but still trying my best to stay quiet. I couldn't leave my room. The creak of the floorboards would have gave me away, and he could easily hear me from the balcony. I could not scream for help either. My mom was out drinking, and my younger sister was at my grandparents' house. I was alone, and watched in terror as he approached the window. He tried opening the window, but it wouldn't budge from the outside. So he just sat there, staring into my bedroom. It became a waiting game. Minutes felt like hours. I had this awful feeling that if I made any noise, he would leap up and smash his way through. Around 5 a.m., my mom's car pulled into the driveway. Relief washed over me. She actually saw Josh and began yelling at him. I heard him scrambling back down the pipes. She initially thought that I had invited him over, but when I explained to her what was going on, she hugged me and said that she was glad I was okay. We called the police, but they said they couldn't do anything since he hadn't assaulted me. It's been a year and a half now. I haven't seen or heard from Joshua since. He just simply vanished. Maybe that's for the best. Wherever you are, Joshua, I hope you got some help and moved on, because you came extremely close to going down a very dark path.
Let me tell you a story. So the other day, I was just hanging around on my computer, same old teenager things. I'm usually logged onto Skype while I'm on the computer, and leave it there in case a friend wanted to randomly call me. So it didn't surprise me all too much when I got a sudden Skype call as I was browsing Facebook. What did surprise me though, was that I couldn't see who it was that was calling me. There was no name. There was just a blank space where there was usually a username to tell me who was trying to contact me. I figured it was just one of my friends playing a prank on me, so I just said the hell with it and accepted the call. There wasn't anybody there. It was completely black, so I hollered a hello. No response. There was nothing coming from my headphones, not even the random background noise you hear when no one's speaking through the microphone. I decided to type out a message, simply sending another hello. There was no response to that either. I decided I would just leave it, but for some reason I opened up another window instead of ending the call. Just as I opened up Facebook again, I got a Skype message back. Don't back away from me. Well, that was pretty creepy, I thought. I decided to message back. Who is this? Suddenly, the sound turned on, and I heard a loud, wheezing laugh. The camera was still black, but then it flickered. I couldn't make out what I saw at all. It was like trying to catch and remember perfectly a single frame during a movie reel with your naked eye. Almost impossible. I figured it had to be one of my friends playing a prank on me. But don't get me wrong, it was working. I was scared witless. This time, I decided to speak fiercely. Are you going to tell me who you are, dick? I heard the wheezing laughter again, but this time, it came from behind me. I was almost sure of it. Not from my headphones. I spun around quickly, but it was far too dark to see anything. With a black screen from my Skype call and a dark wallpaper background, there wasn't enough bright light to see anything around my room. I decided I must be getting paranoid, and it was from my headphones, so I turned back around to the computer screen. I saw a small, dim light on the Skype video call. It seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. I shivered as I moved my head forward to get a closer look, and saw a person's head move over the dim light of the screen. That was my head.
When my boyfriend and I were both still in college, we rented out an Airbnb in Las Vegas during the summer. It was a modest 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house right by the Vegas Strip, making everything in walking distance. This one summer, just wanting to get away from life and away from it all, we booked the Airbnb wanting to have a nice time. The owner was nice, but was very strict on having people over. We assured him we didn't know anyone in Vegas and would honor his wishes. Our third night there, we had just gotten back from the casino after gambling some of our spending money. We've never been to Vegas, so it was okay to gamble at least once. A few hours after we got back to the Airbnb, I was feeling a little ill, so we decided to sleep in separate bedrooms to avoid the spread. However, the bed frame in the other bedroom was broken, so we agreed that I would sleep on the bed while my boyfriend slept on the floor with a simple blanket. I felt bad in the moment, but he didn't mind it though, and we fell asleep shortly after. A few hours go by when I was suddenly awoke to my boyfriend nudging me. He was standing over the bed, trying to wake me up. I take a look at my phone and ask him in an annoyed tone what was so important at 4 a.m. There was a short pause before he said he was hungry and that we should go down to the gas station for a snack. I told him that if he was hungry that he could go himself and to let me sleep. This doesn't satisfy him though. He didn't want to go alone and insisted I go with him. This was weird as I had never seen him act like this before. There was something about his tone that was just off-putting. At least, that was my logic. After several attempts of getting me to come with him, I finally obliged and put on my sandals. We walk outside of the house and start heading towards the street when my boyfriend says, "Babe, I'm not actually hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's someone sleeping there." My heart sank as he said this, and I repeatedly asked him questions to make sure he wasn't playing some sick joke. By some stupid luck, the person didn't see my boyfriend as they were facing the other way. We called the police, and lo and behold, they came out of the Airbnb with a homeless-looking man in handcuffs. However, he didn't try to get away and sort of just let the police arrest him. Looking back, it seemed as if he were wasted or on drugs. We still aren't sure how the man managed to sneak in the house, as the owner claims he had security cameras and would have definitely seen him. This makes us believe that this man had been inside the house for quite some time, even before us. And that's a very scary thing to think. It was the summer of 2016, and my friends and I were taking a road trip down to Miami for Ultra. Ultra is a widely popular music festival around the world that was hosted once a year with many popular celebrities. If you're a big music fan, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, my friends that I had gone with decided to get an Airbnb to stay in, as that would be the cheaper option than a hotel and was well within our budget. I've heard a lot of bizarre and creepy experiences when renting Airbnbs, but at the time we really didn't think much of it. We'd be at the event for the weekend, which meant that we'd also be renting the Airbnb for the whole time. It wasn't a huge house or anything, just the appropriate size for a group of friends. This had been a weekend we've all been looking forward to for about a year now, so we made the most of it. Fast forward to the day of the festival. We're all partying, having a good time, when I take notice of a man staring intently at my friend. This was common, as it's a large event with many people, so it was no surprise there were creeps. However, my friend didn't feel threatened or uncomfortable. She's had several encounters of people looking at her like this, and she sort of just let it go, as it was normal to her. We all sort of dismiss it as some harmless druggie and continue on with our night. The venue was huge with a lot of people, I'd say about 5,000, and after a night of drinking and dancing, we all had went home. It's around 1 a.m. and we're all starting to go to bed so we could get up early the next day. However, I have always had trouble sleeping throughout my life. I've always had an innate fear of the night ever since I was a child, and for whatever reason, I guess it stuck with me through adulthood. I wasn't so much afraid of what lied in the dark, but rather the dark itself. I always saw it as some silly fear, but this night definitely confirmed my fears. At this point, it's about 2 a.m. and everyone was asleep but me. After constantly rolling around in bed, I finally got some shut-eye, when I awoke to my friend shaking me. In my groggy state, I ask her what she wanted when she says,
"Do you not hear that? Someone's walking around outside."
Now, my bed is right beside the back door, and after rubbing my eyes, I finally heard it. Someone was definitely out there, and it sure as hell wasn't any of us. At first, I would have assumed it was the owner of the home just checking on things. However, why would he be doing that in the middle of the night without us knowing? I get up from my bed and peek outside the window only to see no one there. I knew my mind definitely wasn't playing tricks on me, as I know what I heard. As I get out of bed to go see who it was, I then hear the scream of one of my other friends from another room. Upon rushing into her room, I opened the door and was greeted to a man who I could only recognize as the same man from the concert. The minute he saw me, he basically jumped outside the already open window and ran off into the night. Our two male friends had gone after him, but had given up after they couldn't find him. Police were involved, but there was nothing much they could do other than conducting a police report. We had contacted the actual owner of the house, who was thankfully very understanding and refunded our stay. Since we don't live in Miami, we had to end our trip short and head back home, which was an 8-hour drive. This was many years ago, and my friend has since gotten therapy because of this. She's obviously moved on from it now, but she still talks about it with people till this day. I still mourn over the fact that my friend could have been killed that night if she hadn't woken up. I still have no idea as to how that man from the show managed to find us. My only guess was that he simply followed us, but kept his distance while doing so. I've always wondered about what he might have done had I not gone into the room in time. We've never been back to Miami since, and we also don't rent Airbnbs anymore. This world is full of dangerous and evil people who actually want to cause harm to others. If you ever plan on renting Airbnbs, please do so carefully. Make sure all of the doors and windows are locked at night. You never know who might be lurking.
My brothers, my partner, my best friend and I all recently took a trip to Kansas City to go to the Orville Peck concert. We waited until the sort of last minute to reserve an Airbnb because we weren't all 100% sure who was all going. Nonetheless, we found one just outside of Kansas City, in a suburb called Grandview, at a pretty reasonable rate. The host's overall rating was good, and we didn't see anything out of the ordinary when reading the first few reviews, so we thought we had gotten a fairly good deal. We arrived in Grandview a little after 3 p.m., and our Airbnb was the bottom floor of the owner's home. As we pulled up to the house, we noticed quite a bit of religious signs and statues on the lawn. Now don't get me wrong, I don't have an issue with people believing in whatever they believe in, so long as it doesn't infringe upon other people's rights. But here we are, a group of very visibly queer folks about to attend a gay country concert, blindly walking into someone's home that we'd be staying in for the next 2 nights. We decided there was nothing to be worried about. And after all, we technically were in the Bible Belt, so we shouldn't be surprised that we're staying in the home of someone who is religious. My brother and partner called the host and met her at the door of our guest suite. She showed them around while the rest of us got our suitcases unloaded. When they came back to meet us, they said that she was super nice. And again, our minds were eased. We decided to hang out, order food, and rest a little before we headed off for the concert that night. Our comfort did not last long though. While we were getting our suitcases unpacked, laying around in one of the bedrooms of our guest suite, my youngest brother was casually looking through the drawers of the dressers and side tables, as anyone would do. Most of what he found was normal. Extra bed sheets, pens, paper tablets, nothing really out of the ordinary. That is, until he came across something that would completely change our outlook on the trip itself. Inside the drawer was a Bible, not super weird considering where we were staying, but he was flipping through the pages of it. A small tinfoil packet fell out. Now, for those of you who don't know anything about drugs or what they look like, what fell out of that Bible rhymes with smack star Sarowin. That's right, not even 30 minutes into our stay, my youngest brother found hard drugs in the folds of a Bible. At this point, we weren't really sure what to do. We did not want to tell the host, and we most certainly did not want to call the cops. We contemplated about taking the packet and throwing it away at some random gas station, but ultimately, we decided to put it back where we found it and act like none of us had seen it. We got our food and started to get ready for the concert. While the rest of us got ready, my partner, who was not going to the concert, started reading through the household handbook. Everything seemed pretty standard except a few lines that read something like, "We will respect your privacy so long as you respect ours. We can be available as you need us to be. And if you're interested in speaking about the ministries of God, feel free to reach out." Again, I have nothing against people following the religions that they do, but that seemed like an awfully out of place thing to put in your house rules handbook for your guest suite. There were a few more books lying around that stuck out a little off base with titles like Teaching Men to Comprehend How Women Think and How Women Should Think. We ignored these things for the most part, aside from my partner who is now freaked out about being left alone at the suite while the rest of us went off to the concert. I told him it was just some Bible thumping and that he really didn't have anything to worry about. He's a worrywart though. So as soon as we left, he locked himself in the bedroom and started looking a little more into the books that we had found. He came to the realization that the books were associated with the group called International House of Prayer, a prominent religious cult founded in Kansas City, a majority of whose members live in the Grandview suburb, where we were staying. I could write a whole separate post about the beliefs of those members, but essentially, they are an evangelical Christian group that has a functioning 24/7 prayer room that has been going non-stop since 1999. It's all too much to go over here. We got back from the concert really late, and not to mention a couple of us were still heavily intoxicated from drinking. So he didn't mention much about it that night, but he was very quick to tell us about it the next morning. At this point, we thought, okay, these people are part of some weird church, whatever, it's fine. That explains some of the weird rules and books we had found. We left for the day to go hang out around the city. When we got back to rest, my friend and partner started doing some more reading on the group. That is when they found out that we were actually staying in one of the prominent leaders' houses. We figured this out by cross-referencing the names of our hosts with the names of important members on the International House of Prayer University website. After this, we started to snoop a little more in our suite. We found large barrels of dried food, a jug of some liquid that we later found out is what they drink while they fast, and lots more teaching materials. Basically, it seemed like they were completely prepared for some sort of end times rapture. Eventually, we did go back and read more thoroughly through some of the reviews, and found a few that would have set off some red flags. For example, one of the reviews stated how the male owner brought out a gun in front of the people who were staying there. Yikes. Not to mention, if there was even a hint of a negative review left, the host would leave a snarky reply. Needless to say, we spent as much of our time as possible away from that Airbnb as we could for the remainder of our trip. And although we were never in any direct danger, we did feel very uncomfortable throughout the entire thing. I've gotten a lot of questions about the heroin. First off, I know that it doesn't come back up in our story, but ultimately, it was the catalyst to all the other weird stuff that we slowly uncovered. And I knew it was heroin because I've seen it before. I have family and friends that have used it, and it is also one of the first things to come up if you Google drugs in foil packet. I do not know if it was left there by a previous guest or if it was the owners. Either way, finding it in a Bible within our first hour of being there was off-putting to say the very least. After reading a few posts on here, I've decided to add one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it, I still get this unnerved bad feeling that sort of lingers. Anyway, here goes. A group of friends and myself rented out a place on the week just for a fun-filled drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be just for a big party. For the most part, that's exactly what it was. The Friday night and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out, having a blast on the water, just doing fun, stupid stuff. Well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going all out, we decided it would just be a night of no drinking, maybe a little weed smoking, and just have a chill evening and night. And that's exactly what it was, very relaxed. So 9 p.m. rolls around, and about 8 of us were inside the house and 5 outside the house. It was a 2-story house with a second-story deck / back porch, and it was surrounded by the woods, and then down through the woods, you would hit the lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived, mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assumed were leering and irritated because we were a bunch of college-age kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake were so large, it's not like anyone knew where we were staying. Anyways, 3 of my friends were upstairs on the back porch, and my other friend and I were downstairs outside, just talking a little on this old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were just getting lost in conversation, and all of a sudden, there was this weird feeling that encompassed us. Like an unnerving physical experience that came from the woods down behind us. It was so strong we both kind of just quieted down, and then out of nowhere, this loud chanting abruptly came from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because of the way the lake is set up. I'm pretty sure the voices carried up through the forest though. It sounded like a cult chanting away, and all the voices were male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were frozen for all about 20 seconds before I couldn't contain myself anymore and darted towards the house with her following behind. It's hard to describe, and I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with that chanting, but it was definitely evil. Like something just so powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time we got up to the second story and ran out onto the balcony with our other 3 friends, one of them being my brother. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" in the most shaky, freaked out voice. They all had heard it too, and not just seconds later, the chanting began again. So the 5 of us are out there peering into the forest, listening to the chanting that would sometimes sound far away and then sound relatively close. All male voices in the weirdest language, or I don't even know what it was. Sounded like some strange extreme church. Then following the chanting, a loud bang, like someone hit a huge metal object sounded. And then, the worst part came. A man wailing, like in extreme pain wailing. All of my hair was up. It was the freakiest experience ever. My brother and I were staring at one another in a mixture of scared, excitement, and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it that I wanted to call the cops, because whoever was screaming had definitely been in a lot of pain. And that mixed with the weird chanting just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys just messing around, singing, and being weird. But no way was that coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync. Then the bang, then the wail of pain. And then, all that weird tension and energy was just gone. Nope. I didn't call the cops, and I wish I would have. But honestly, the forest was so large, and since the lake house was up looking down at the woods in the lake, it could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but close enough to hear all of it that perfectly. We all went inside and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go out and explore and find where the sound had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, it gives me the worst feeling ever. Whatever that was, it felt so wrong and so evil. I will never forget it. I can only imagine that it was some kind of weird cult stuff. A story on here reminded me of the time some friends and I had stayed in what turned out to be the 3rd most shadiest hotel in Las Vegas, which for Las Vegas is definitely saying something. I also managed to inadvertently traumatize the entirety of my company, as I recounted what I considered to be just an amusing childhood story. The hotel itself was a bit of a nightmare, as everything was bolted down and none of the doors locked, but I digress. The story itself is about my family's run-in with Satanists on a trip to upstate New York. Though, the growing expressions of disbelief and horror on my companions' faces assured me that the story was not, as I had previously considered, funny per se. In any case, what follows is completely true, and everyone present swears by this narrative. When I was 5 years of age, we took a road trip to upstate New York to see my grandmother on my father's side, as well as to tour around the countryside a little bit. There we were in rural upstate, away from the region in which my grandmother actually lives, and we were planning on staying in a bed and breakfast my father had booked ahead of time. It had been an unexpectedly long drive due to weather complications, and when we found the B&B in question, we were all quite tired. We went up to the door to check in, and a woman missing her 2 front teeth on both jaws answered. She invited us in, but warned us that they didn't have a room for the night. They were booked solid. My father protested that he had made arrangements in advance, but she said she knew another hotel that had vacancy just up the way, and she would give them a call, and she assured him that they would offer the same rates. But first, she insisted on showing my parents around, as her husband was an artist and she wanted to show them his studio and his quote-unquote famous artwork. We were all invited in, but after seeing the first few pieces of naked women missing their front teeth, bound or being tortured in various ways, my parents opted to leave the kids outside with Grandma. Apparently most of the rooms were full to the ceiling with similarly foreboding images of dead or dying people, with the occasional sculpture of menacing animals. My parents were a bit creeped out, but just figured these people were a little eccentric, and they had dodged a bullet by ending up somewhere else. We all waited out back while the woman called her friend, beside a pit containing what could have been nothing other than an altar covered with pentagrams. My mother mentioned that it seemed strange that not only had they not met the husband, who was supposedly there somewhere, having toured the entire house, but there hadn't been a single sign of life or piece of luggage suggesting that anyone else was actually staying in any of these guest rooms in this supposedly fully booked B&B. A side note that's probably not worth mentioning, but I've found strange when my mother brought it up while telling me the story later, was that we stopped by a park to stretch our legs at some point before proceeding to the next place. The storm was closing in on us, and my parents wanted to be sure we had zero energy upon arrival. While in this park, my mother claimed that one of us found and brought to her a small necklace with a pendant on it. The pendant itself was a pentagram on one side with a Third Reich symbol on the other. My mother took it away and put it inside her purse. We arrived at the next bed and breakfast to be greeted by a different woman, also suspiciously missing her 2 front teeth, upper and lower. It was about this time that my grandmother mentioned that she had read a lot of articles recently about tourists being killed by some cult of Satanists or some such in this area. Great. She tended to tell a lot of tall tales, so I think my parents kind of rolled their eyes and dismissed it, but they made a point to mention it later. The storm was now upon us, and we were all exhausted, and there was nowhere else to stay that we could find anywhere near there. My dad decided we would make do with whatever they had to offer. What they had to offer was a slightly renovated barn. During the bustle of moving our luggage in, the woman kept inviting my brother and I into the house, saying she had some sweets, and wouldn't we like to meet her kitties? She made it clear, however, that my parents were not welcome into the house because it was too messy, and she would be embarrassed. We were then herded away into the barn and told not to talk to the lady. Once inside, my father, who was by this time a bit creeped out, went about checking the beds and securing the one-room barn unit. The windows had no coverings whatsoever, and the doors had no locks. We placed pillows from the couches in the window frames, and my dad grabbed a dresser against one wall to block the door. When he went to move the dresser, he discovered it was on wheels, which were completely silent. He also noticed that the wall behind it moved a little when he shifted the dresser. When he scrutinized the wall, he found a seam. He pushed on the wall and it gave way, 2 invisible doors opening outwards into the night. And just outside was a dark-colored van which had been backed up to the opening. Livid, my dad went about rearranging all the furniture in the room, stacking the heaviest against the outward swinging doors, and moving the mobile dresser with various loud objects behind it against the main door. When he had completed this, we all started to settle down. This was around 11 p.m. The woman brought us freshly baked blueberry muffins. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't remember much of this trip, but this is one element I have a vivid recollection of. With the inclement weather and the rush to find a place to stay, complemented by the lack of restaurants in the area, we hadn't had what one might consider a proper meal. When you're 5, dinner is very important. The muffins were fresh baked and smelled heavenly, and I wanted one more than anything else in the world. However, presuming, and probably correctly, that they were poisoned or something was seriously wrong about them, since this entire thing was beginning to feel like a horror movie. My mother absolutely forbid us from even going near them. She put them on a high shelf and sent us to bed. I was so angry. I went to bed hungry and irritable. Only 2 things happened that night that I can recall. My parents slept very lightly, when at all, as you can imagine. They claimed they kept hearing talking outside. My sister woke all of us up with a blood-curdling scream around 1 a.m. for reasons unknown. She was usually a very quiet baby. When my parents got up and milled about for an hour trying to get her back to bed, my mom noticed something on the wall as she was walking her around and called my father over. What I would later learn was the picture hanging to one side of that door that during the daylight seemed to be logs in a recently extinguished fire pit in a tranquil forest scene, but by night was unmistakably burning corpses with a hooded smoky figure looming over them. We got up the next morning, packed up early, and waited for the lady to get up so we could pay and leave. While my parents were packing the bags, the woman came around back and gave my brother and I small wooden cats carved into the form of napkin holders, each a different color, and she had written little notes on. As my father was paying after loading us into the car, my mom began kicking gravel around the dirt absentmindedly. The woman came over to say goodbye and waved to us with her gapped grin, and my mother noticed that she was trying to discreetly recover the tiles that she was uncovered under the gravel. Before driving off, my mother got back out of the car and uncovered one of the tiles, and she claimed it was the same pentagram with the Third Reich symbol within it that she had seen a similar version of in that park, prompting her to notice, as we drove away, that the necklace was no longer in her purse. The likelihood of it simply falling out of the purse pocket she had placed it in was, as she put it, quite unlikely. People listening to this story seemed appalled at the fact that I still have that little wooden cat that the nice lady had given me, sitting in my bedroom. I know this all sounds very strange, but I can only assure you that it matches well with my memory of the events. And all the adults who were there tell the same story. Personally, I'm glad it's just a weird story we look back on with confusion, and that nothing stranger actually happened that night. Update. According to my mom, whom I spoke with today, it was near Millbrook, and one was a farm and the other was an old mill. I actually found the website for the B&B. It's still running, but with different owners. I don't know that I should post a link, however. They seemed like nice people who have improved it quite a lot.
I stumbled across the link on a Craigslist psych discussion forum. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just killing time scrolling through threads on lucid dreaming and conspiracies about subliminal messaging. And then I saw the post. Live feed, smiling man, watch if you dare. It had a single link, no description, and a sense of weirdness that kind of pulled me in, and against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The stream loaded quickly, revealing a man sitting in a plain wooden chair in the middle of an empty room, and the lighting was flat and harsh, giving the whole scene a very clinical vibe. He was staring directly at the camera, unblinking, with the kind of smile you'd expect from someone trying too hard in a family photo. It wasn't quite unsettling at first, it was just kind of strange. And I waited for him to do something. A wave, a twitch, a shift in his seat, anything. But he didn't. He just sat there, his wide eyes locked on the lens, his lips frozen in that eerie grin. And I checked the timestamp. It was live. I remember thinking, well, this is weird, while glancing at the chat window. It was empty, no viewers except for me, and curiosity kept me from watching. Now 5 minutes turned into 10, and then 20. He didn't move once. No blinking, no fidgeting, nothing. It was like he was frozen in time except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The longer I stared, the more unnatural it felt, as if he were daring me to keep looking. And then suddenly, I heard a noise. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but it grew louder, a faint creak like footsteps on old wood. But the man didn't react. The sound got louder, footsteps echoing faintly in the stream, coming from somewhere out of view. A shadow flickered across the far wall of the room and my stomach tightened. Someone was there. Someone else. I leaned closer to the screen and my pulse was quickening. A figure appeared, blurry at first, and then cleared as they moved cautiously into the frame. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, wearing a ski mask, and he was holding a sledgehammer. The intruder didn't seem to notice the live camera at first. He glanced around the room, gripping the hammer tightly, and then froze when his eyes landed on the smiling man. But that man, he didn't move an inch. His grin didn't falter and his gaze didn't shift. The intruder hesitated, his posture stiffening. He took a step closer, waved a hand in front of the smiling man's face. Nothing. And then he whispered something, low enough that I couldn't make it out. The smiling man stayed silent, and he didn't even blink. The intruder backed away slowly, muttering to himself, and then turned and bolted out of the frame. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere off screen, and for a moment the room was quiet again, except for the faint hum of the camera. The man didn't so much as flinch. I closed the tab, but the image of his frozen, smiling face stayed with me long after. I never went back to that stream, but sometimes I wonder how many people have found it since, and who's really watching who. I remember being 8 years old and my dad bringing home our first home computer. I have very vivid memories of how excited he and my mom were and how Dad let me use MS Paint to get me accustomed to using the mouse. It seemed like a big deal to them, but it was like a positive thing, you know, something they were excited about. But then when we finally got hooked up to the internet, that was a big deal in a whole different kind of way. My dad treated the computer like it was a gift from the gods and the key to the 21st century, which I guess in many ways it was, kind of. But he treated the internet like it was a loaded gun. I later learned that an uncle had warned my mom about how the internet was full of very dark stuff that had warped my young mind. And while I'd say that that statement had a whiff of hyperbole about it, I can't say it's completely false either. Maybe 6 or 7 years later, when I was finally allowed to surf the internet unsupervised, I discovered a little website you may know as Craigslist. I'm sure like 90% of people know what Craigslist is, and if you don't, you better just Google it or something, but I wasn't revisiting the place for the sales or the personals. I was returning for all the weird info dumps and discussions taking place in the psych and religion sections of the discussion boards. And that's when I discovered the single most disturbing thing I had ever read online. The story of a little girl named Anna, and how even though I thought my uncle was an old prude, making mountains out of molehills, he was actually kind of right about the whole internet being full of weird and very disturbing stuff. So back in 2007, a young Czech man set up one of those video baby monitors in order to check up on his newborn son. But then one night, he switches it on, and instead of seeing his kid asleep in his crib, he sees a boy of around 6 or 7 bound and gagged in the corner of a dirty cellar. Naturally, the guy rushes to call the cops, who deduce that he somehow received the signal of a similarly video-based baby monitor located in a nearby home. The cops then go door to door, trying to figure out where the signal was coming from, and that's when they meet the Moorova sisters. The older of the two sisters was the single mother of 2 young boys and had recently adopted a 13-year-old girl named Anna. It was one of those 2 boys the young father had witnessed tied up in the basement. It was a form of punishment, but not one devised by the boy's mother or aunt. It was little Anna's idea, the 13-year-old girl adopted by the older Moorova sister. But Anna had not just been manipulating the sisters into brutally punishing the boy. She had been cutting off thin slices of his flesh and then feeding them to the unwitting sisters in their daily meals. And at first, the police believed Anna was just another victim of the sisters' abuse. Yet oddly, the girls didn't show any of the same signs of abuse that the boys had, be it burns, bruises, or scars. The 2 boys confirmed it too, only they were ever subjected to abuse and Anna remained untouched. Somehow, Anna had convinced the two boys that they deserved to be punished, which was why they never thought to fight back or otherwise defend themselves. The same was true for the two sisters. Somehow, Anna had convinced them that what they were doing was the right thing to do, and neither of them had a history of being abusive until little Anna had showed up on their doorstep. Little Anna was adopted, all right, but the Morova sisters hadn't visited an orphanage or contacted some kind of adoption agency. Little Anna had simply turned up on their doorstep one day and had never left. The cops do some digging on little Anna, trying to find out where she came from, then after months upon months of searching, this is what they discovered. 13-year-old Anna was not 13 years old. She wasn't even named Anna. She was actually in her early 30s. Her name was Barbara, and the only reason she could pass as a young girl was because she had some rare developmental disorder. The cops moved to arrest the woman only to find that she'd fled the country. But thanks to them being able to circulate recent photos of her, she was quickly tracked down and then brought back to the Czech Republic to face justice. It turns out she was in Poland, posing as a 14-year-old boy, and she'd already talked her way into the home of a young family who had, you guessed it, 2 young children. On the Craigslist discussion board, there were all kinds of rumors that Anna's birth parents were connected to some weird cult called the Grail Movement. But even as a teenager, I found the connection to be odd at best. The only thread that held them together was the idea that the movement's goal was to create a kind of Metachrist, essentially a copy of Jesus with all the same preternatural powers. Supposedly, Anna was this Metachrist, but then without the proper guidance, she turned rotten and used her powers for evil. The Grail movement was a real thing, and a serious enough movement that the National Socialists went after them after they annexed Austria. But I think people just wanted to tag the two subjects together to make the whole thing into some vast, creepy conspiracy, when to me, the whole thing is just scary enough on its own. These days, I think back on it, on what my uncle said about the internet being full of weird, creepy stuff, and I think he's partially right. But it's not the internet that's packed with all of those strange, frightening things. It's the world outside of our windows. Real life. The world and the people in it. Those are the really scary things. All websites like Craigslist do is kind of act like a window, which allows all of us to see it, truly. Way back before I moved out of my parents' place, my little cousin spilled Mountain Dew all over my PlayStation and just totally fried the thing. A few hours later, I was scrolling my local Craigslist when, bingo, I see a PS3 for sale for $100. The post said it was in good condition, and the seller claimed that he needed the money urgently. It seemed too good to be true, but since it was the holidays and everywhere was mostly snowed in, I was bored out of my mind and I was desperate. I texted the number listed, and the seller replied quickly, suggesting that we meet in the parking lot of a closed-down Kmart on the edge of town. He insisted on cash and stressed the need for a quick transaction because he didn't want to be sitting in his car freezing his butt off. I felt uneasy. I told myself that I'd be careful. As long as I saw the PlayStation 3 before handing over the money, I figured I'd be fine. When I pulled into the lot, it was completely empty, aside from the dark car parked at the far end, and a man in a hoodie leaned against the driver's door. He raised a hand in acknowledgement as I approached and then asked if I had the cash. His tone was casual, almost bored, so it didn't raise any red flags at all for me. I nodded, and then he motioned toward the backseat of his car, saying the PlayStation 3 was there and inviting me to check it out. I stepped out of my car, walked towards his, and then opened the back door. Inside was a box, but something was off. It wasn't sealed, and when I lifted the lid, it wasn't a PlayStation 3. Instead, it was an old, dusty console that looked like it hadn't worked in years. And before I could react, I sensed the guy stepping closer behind me. Then out of nowhere, he pulls a gun from his waistband and tells me to hand over the cash, or I'm dead. The whole time his voice was low and controlled, and he didn't sound remotely nervous. But I felt like I was about to piss my pants as I reached for the envelope in my pocket. As I turned to hand it over, I caught sight of another person in the driver's seat of his car, crouched low and watching very intently. This wasn't just a bad deal. It was a straight-up setup. And when that hit me, it hit me like a punch in the face. I had this gut feeling that they weren't about to let me leave and that the guy's next command was going to be for me to get into his car. Instead of just handing over the money and staying put, I tossed the envelope into the car, then instinctually just bailed. I threw the cash in the hopes they'd be happy with their $100, but then, looking back on it, who robs someone for just $100? They didn't want the money. They wanted me. And from what they did next, I'm not sure if they cared if I was dead or alive. The first gunshot cracked the air behind me, and then the asphalt kicked up near my feet. I didn't waste a second. I dove from my car, fumbling with my door handle until a second shot followed, louder and sharper and shattering my rear window. I finally got the door closed, started the engine, and then just stomped on the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. When I finally made it home, I locked all the doors and sat in the dark for hours, trying to shake off the shock. The shattered glass in my back seat was a grim reminder of just how close I'd come to something far worse, a near miss that could have ended much differently. Back when I was younger, a little reckless, and eager to find love, I thought it'd be a great idea to check out the personal section on Craigslist. Most of the ads I saw were either blatantly fake or downright creepy, but after scrolling for a while, one caught my eye. It was very short and straightforward. Looking for something casual, just broke up with my boyfriend, don't want anything serious, message me if you're interested. Something about it seemed genuine and the attached photo sealed the deal. And this girl was gorgeous, like sort of way out of my league, so I decided that I'd send her a message. She replied almost immediately and things moved fast, really fast, and within a few exchanges she was sending provocative pictures. And I really couldn't believe my luck, but something felt off, like it was way too good to be true. Now, half joking, I sent her a message, "If this is real, send me a picture with my name written on a piece of paper." And to my shock, she did, and that was really all the proof I needed to know that she was real. We kept talking, and she told me that she wasn't looking for anything serious, just a no-strings-attached hookup. Her ex had just moved out, and she wasn't ready for a relationship. She just wanted to have some fun. She then gave me her address and told me to come over. And to make sure everything was legit, I called her, and she answered on the first ring, and her voice was just as alluring as her photos. She said that she was at home, waiting for me. It all felt like a dream that I was going to wake up from at any second, but it wasn't. It was real. When I pulled up to that address, it was a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house looked normal, with a nearly trim lawn and a long driveway. I called her again to let her know that I was there. No answer. I tried again, and still nothing. I started to feel uneasy, but I was convincing myself that I was overthinking. Maybe she was just in the bathroom or had stepped away from her phone. Trying to shake off the nerves, I got out of the car and walked toward the house, and that's when I saw them. Two men were standing in the window, staring me down as I walked up the driveway. They each looked extremely sketchy, like they'd stepped straight out of a police lineup, and one had a shaved head and a sort of scowl, while the other was very wiry, with tattoos covering his arms. And my blood immediately ran cold. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there, and without a second thought, I turned and sprinted back to my car. My heart pounded as I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sped off. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them chasing after me. When I finally got home, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, and maybe those guys had nothing to do with her. But deep down, I knew better. About an hour later, I got a text from the girl. "You're a loser," it read. "That was my boyfriend, and we were just messing with you." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and relief. So much for the ex part, right? And I tried to brush it off as some sick joke, and they probably got a kick out of scaring guys like me. It was messed up, sure, but at least I was okay, I guess. But a few days later, the local news told a much darker story. A man had answered a Craigslist ad in that same neighborhood, and when he showed up, 2 men ambushed him. They beat him, robbed him, and left him barely alive, and he ended up in the hospital fighting for his life. The police said it was a setup, and in the description of the house matched the one that I had been at, and a very cold chill ran down my spine. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to being their victim. If I hadn't noticed those guys in the window, I might not have made it out, and the thought haunted me for a while. These weren't just pranksters messing around. They were predators, willing to hurt someone for a quick payday. They lured me in with fake promises and a pretty face, and I'd almost fallen for it. Even now I can't shake the memory. The way those men stared at me, unblinking, as if I'd already been caught in their trap. And the relief that I felt when I drove away was replaced by a very sickening realization. I'd been extremely lucky. The man on the news wasn't so fortunate, and I can't help but wonder how many had fallen for that exact same trap. I met him through a Craigslist personals ad. His posts weren't anything fancy, just kind of awkward and sweet, and it said something like, looking for someone to grab a drink with, laugh a little, and see where it goes. And it caught my attention because it felt real. And we started swapping emails, and he came off as funny and kind, maybe a little rough around the edges, but not really in a bad way. Then, after a week of chatting, we agreed to meet up in person. The bar was crowded, but we found a quiet corner to sit and talk, and right away, I noticed that he had this natural charm about him. He was funnier and way more engaging in person than I expected. He made me laugh, and the way he listened and responded made it feel like he'd be a great listener and maybe at some point in the future, a very attentive boyfriend. And as the night went on, he suggested heading to a nearby pool hall so we could continue enjoying one another's company. And I thought, why not? I had driven, so I offered to take him there. At the pool hall, we played a few games and the conversation kept flowing. He made me laugh, so much so that I almost forgot that we'd only just met. And then suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table and he looked at the screen and his face sort of dropped and then everything changed. "I need to tell you something," he said. And I froze, not really sure what was coming. "I'm a convicted felon, and I just got out of prison." And my mind started spinning. I didn't even have time to process that before he said, "And I have a girlfriend. I live with her, but it's not serious. I'm just staying there until I get back on my feet." And I was completely blindsided. This man who had been charming and funny all evening had just thrown all of this at me like it was no big deal. Then he added one more thing. "She just texted me. She walked into the bar earlier and saw us together, and she knows I'm with you." In that moment, I knew the date was over. I wanted to get out of there, but I'd driven us, and I didn't feel right just leaving him stranded. I told him that I'd take him back to his car, but the vibe on the drive was completely tense and uncomfortable. And as we drove, the alcohol must have really hit him because he started crying. Just quiet tears at first, but then it turned into full-on sobbing. He kept apologizing over and over, saying how much he regretted everything, and I didn't know what to say. And then out of nowhere, he reached for the car door handle. And a panic rose up inside of me, and I yelled, "We're on the goddamn highway!" And he didn't seem to care. He was crying so hard, and it was like he wasn't even hearing me. And I hit the child locks as fast as I could. I yelled at him, trying to stay calm, but inside I was terrified. I didn't know what he was going to do next. The rest of the drive felt like it took forever, and he kept mumbling and crying, and I just focused on getting us back to the bar as fast as possible. When we finally got there, I let him out and watched him stumble to his car, and as soon as he was out of sight, I just drove away as fast as I could. I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later I got a message from an unknown number. It was his girlfriend, and my stomach dropped. She sent pictures of her face, bruised and swollen with a split lip, and she told me he'd beaten her up after our date. She'd confronted him about seeing me, and that's how he reacted, and I felt sick. This man who had made me laugh and seemed so sweet at first was a violent monster. I couldn't believe that I'd spent an entire evening with him, laughing and having fun, all while being completely unaware of what he was capable of. His soon-to-be ex-girlfriend and I started talking more and more after that, and she told me all about the things he'd done to her, and it was horrifying. Then not long after, she left him for good, and we actually became friends. It's strange how something so terrible can lead to something good, but I guess that's life. And that night changed me. I learned to trust my gut and pay attention to those red flags. If something feels off, it probably is. And looking back, I can't believe how close I came to being another one of his victims, and it serves as a reminder to be careful and to never underestimate what someone is capable of.
This happened 2 years ago, and it still puts me on edge thinking about it. My husband, myself, and our then 2-year-old daughter moved to Tennessee to get a fresh start on life. We were all exhausted after a long drive and just wanted to get out the mattresses. My parents, who lived in Tennessee already, were helping us unload. Naturally, all the neighbors in our apartment complex came out and said hi. That's when we met Ben. Right away, I got creepy vibes off of him. Our daughter, who to this day is way too friendly to strangers, hid behind my husband and visibly cringed. We made small talk, but mainly paid more attention to unloading our stuff than chatting with our new neighbors. My dad later told me that at one point, he came back to the truck and saw Ben staring at our daughter. My dad called him out, and when Ben denied it, my husband eventually told him to go Later that night, me and my husband were still going through our stuff. Our daughter was staying the night at my parents' house. It was about 10:30 p.m. when we heard a knock at the door. Thinking that it was the pizza that I ordered, my husband opened the door, and there stood Ben. He asked us if we needed any help. Him showing up at our door so late at night, even for a friendly neighbor, was just creepy. Before we could tell him to get lost, he demanded a cigarette. Not only was he a total weirdo, but now he was just being plain rude. Neither of us smoked, and when we told him, he got a bit pissed. He started yelling and screaming at my husband, and began pounding on the wall. This guy was unhinged. Thankfully, our landlord lived across the way from us at the time, and came out to tell him off. As Ben sauntered away, our landlord explained to us that Ben is the resident pest, and suffered from mental issues, but overall, was harmless as long as he took his meds. Yeah, because that's exactly what you want to hear on your first night in a new place. After that, life kind of fell into place, and we settled in without any further disruptions. We had crazy schedules and would sometimes work graveyard shifts. I would get home around midnight and would see Ben standing outside the apartment buildings. He would always seem to be staring at me. I would just ignore him, mainly because I was just too tired and wanted to get to bed. He would always ask me for cigarettes, and I kept telling him that I didn't smoke. My husband said that he did the same thing to him. We would change up our work times just to throw Ben off a little, and at first, it worked. But Ben started to pester us during the day. On our days off, we would take our kid to the park or the mountains. One time, Ben asked to come with us, said that he was great with kids, and that we could trust him alone with our daughter. I really should have just let my husband deck him in the face right then and there. When we came back, he was sitting in our parking spot, said that he was making sure no one parked in it. He then tried to hug our daughter, and she screamed and clung on to me for dear life. I took her into the house while my husband finally snapped and really gave the guy an earful, telling him just to leave us alone. We told the landlord, but they played the whole mental issues card. And look, I get it. Mental illness is never fun to deal with, but he was constantly harassing and terrifying my daughter, and we have a duty to protect our family. It got to the point where my daughter didn't want to go outside because the bad man would be out there and stare at her. We threatened to cut our lease if something wasn't done about it. I began talking to my other neighbors, and everyone seemed to have the same type of experience. One of my neighbors told me that he and another neighbor saw Ben staring at some of the young girls wearing bathing suits and short shorts by the community pool, and they chased him off. They reported this to the landlord, but nothing was ever done. After about a month, things had quieted down. Ben wasn't spotted outside anymore. In fact, no one really saw him. We figured he moved away or something. Good riddance. We were thinking about moving in with my folks, while we saved up the money for a real house. One night, I came home from work early. My husband was out of town because of work, and my parents had taken our daughter to visit some family. I decided to play Saints Row 4 and relax after working an 11-hour shift. I was deep into the game when someone knocked on the door. It was about 10 p.m. at this point. If anyone was coming over that late, they would have called or texted first. I got up to see who it was. Before I got to the door, the knob began to shake violently. Then I heard Ben screaming, "Let me in! Open this goddamn door!" The heavy knocking turned into him slamming his shoulder against the door. He was screaming like a deranged madman. I grabbed my phone, the sharpest knife that we had from the kitchen, and hid in the closet. Cliché, I know, but if he managed to get in, there would at least be some distance between us. I called 911, and they said that my other neighbors had called in as well. It was only after I heard the sirens stop and voices yelling outside that I felt safe to come out. I opened my door and saw a cop pinning Ben face down on the ground. The landlord was screaming at the cop to let him go, and he even shoved him. Both of them ended up being arrested. I gave my report, and each one of my neighbors backed up everything I said, and even added in their own experiences. My sweet church lady neighbor called my husband and parents to let them know what was going on, and she even let me stay with her and her family for the night. But after what happened, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking that at any moment I would hear Ben's deranged screaming and pounding from outside. It turns out Ben was a registered sex offender. Rumor has it that the landlord was aware of it, but willingly overlooked it as Ben's family would slip him extra money as long as he was allowed to stay there. That's why nothing was ever done about his behavior. Makes me sick. Ben really did take meds, but had not been on any of them for the past few months. He tried to tell the cops that our daughter was his and that we kidnapped her, and that I was having an affair with him. Crazy, right? Last thing I heard, Ben was placed in some institution. I'm not sure if it was prison or a psych ward. The landlord was fired and pretty much chased out of town. Good riddance. We were offered 3 months rent-free for our trouble, but that was ultimately our breaking point. We sold off most of our belongings and moved in with my parents. I'm happy to say that we have a house now, and our daughter is not afraid to go outside anymore. And yes, we checked all of our neighbors for red dots.
This story takes place in the early 1990s. I was 10 or 11 at the time. My family and I lived in a rural area near Kansas City. This particular area nowadays is very different from what it was in the 90s. Back in the day, it was a very country-like atmosphere. The road that we lived on was a gravel road, and the traffic was very sporadic. Typically, the only people who drove down our road were people who lived on our street, and there were only a few houses on our street at the time. Across the street from the house that we moved into, there was a large cornfield with a few trees near the road. There were a few other boys my age who lived on our street, and we all thought it would be fun to build a treehouse or a fort of some kind. I was across the street nearly every day, and my friends would often walk to my house and then we would go across the street to play in the fort. Think of that scene in the 1990 TV miniseries of Stephen King's It, where the Losers Club was building that dam in the river outside Derry. Yep, it's just like that. One day, I was across the street with one of the other boys. We noticed that there was a small blue car that would drive up and down the street very slowly. Since our road was very narrow and gravelly, it was not unusual for people to drive kind of slow. But this car in particular was driving extremely slow. I noticed that the driver would look out of his window and just sort of eyeball me every time that he drove by. I saw him at least 2 or 3 times that afternoon, but at the time, I remember thinking that he probably either just was curious about our playhouse, or that he was lost and maybe contemplating about asking us for directions. After a while, my friend had to go home, so I was there all by myself. Not long after my friend had left, I saw that same blue car slowly coming down the street once again, but this time, he came to a stop. The driver just sat there and stared at me for a while. I got this uneasy feeling about him. I knew all about stranger danger, even at that age. I began to feel that something bad was going to happen. My dad's words echoed in my head. If a stranger tries to grab you, you run as fast as you can and you scream your head off. I started thinking about which direction I should take off to. I knew that if I ran in the opposite direction of the guy in the car, I would be running into a cornfield that was at least a mile wide in every direction. If I were to run towards my house, I would have to cross the street, meaning that I would have to go past the creepy guy in the car to get to my home. The situation terrified me. My heartbeat escalated as I tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do. While deciding which direction would give me the best chance of getting away, I noticed the man in the car reach down for something. I never did see what he was going for, but something told me that if I didn't start running at that moment, I would be history. I then saw the man open the car door just a crack. I knew my dad was home at the time, so I decided to make a break for it. I knew that I was going to have to cross the street and I would have to get past the man's car. I began running as fast as I could alongside the road in the opposite direction of where his car was facing. I could see out of the corner of my eye that the guy had closed his door. When I reached the road, the driver had put his car in reverse. If I had been a second slower, I wouldn't have made it. The trunk of his car barely missed me as I darted away from the street to my driveway. I began screaming as loud as I could while charging towards my house. My dad ran outside to meet me in the driveway. When I had turned around to show my dad the man in the car, he was gone. All I could see was the dust cloud coming off the gravel road as the mysterious man in his blue car sped out of there. That night, I had a nightmare. I was running down a seemingly endless gravel road. I was panting, sweating, terrified. I would look back and see that blue car getting closer and closer. I woke up my parents. Apparently, I had been yelling in my sleep. I had to sleep in their room for a while, but the night terrors eventually did stop. This was nearly 2 decades ago, but I still remember it very well. There is no doubt in my mind that the man in the blue car was the monsters that your parents tell you about when you're a kid. Had I not run off when I did, I would probably be nothing but a statistic today. I occasionally hear stories about kids who went missing in my area in the 90s, and I wonder if it has anything to do with that man in the blue car. I may never know for sure, but I understand now why my dad always told me to run and scream. I'll be instructing my own children someday to do the same.
My mother was 14 in 1986 when this happened. She lived in China at the time with her parents and younger brother. It was deep into winter when this occurred, and the temperature dropped into the negatives. Snow was falling in thick layers onto the ground. It was around 10 p.m. when my mother finished up her classes, and by then it was dark. Bear in mind, in China it's normal for young students to walk home alone without a parent or guardian. About 10 minutes after getting off the bus, she began walking through this old marketplace to get to her apartment. The marketplace was completely quiet and deserted at this time of night. There was also no lampposts around, so it was hard for my mom to properly see where she was going. But she had traveled this route several times before, so she was familiar and knew her way back home. My mother had this feeling that someone was lurking in the darkness of the marketplace. She tried to shrug it off, but the apprehension persisted. She continued to hear her feet crunching on the white snow. But suddenly, she stopped, and as she did, she could hear a second pair of feet crunching the snow behind her. My mom panicked, but she continued forward and pretended that she hadn't heard anything. She thought it might have been another student making their way back to their living quarters. This thought made sense, but it didn't stop her from walking faster.
As she began to pick up her pace, the crunching snow behind her also began to speed up. My mother couldn't handle the fear any longer and started running, but the thick snow made it difficult for her to run away quickly. She also gave a quick look behind her. She was greeted by the silhouette of a tall man only a few meters away and closing in. The man did not appear to be wearing a coat, despite the freezing temperature. The lack of lampposts made it difficult for my mom to make out anything else. However, that's not what scared my mom the most. She was eventually chased into an area that was lit by a dim light mounted to the side of a merchant stall. When she looked back, she was able to see that her pursuer was carrying a large plank in his hand. Now petrified, she continued to run and refused to look back again. Suddenly, she saw the light of a lamppost that was situated on a small street. Luckily that night, there happened to be a young couple walking towards her. With her last ounce of energy, my mom ran to them and collapsed. My mom was in hysterics when they asked her what was wrong. She explained to them what happened, but by then, the stranger had vanished. The couple that she ran into was living in the same apartment block as her and was familiar with her father. They accompanied her back home, and they told my grandfather where they found her. After the couple left, my mom couldn't stop crying out of shock and fear. From then on, my grandfather would meet my mom at the bus stop where she got off at, and they would walk home together. My mom never found out who her assailant was, and thankfully, she never had another encounter with him again.
I was reading a story that reminded me of an event from over 20 years ago. It was around the second half of 1998. I had taken a security guard job at a plant that manufactured locks. I usually worked one of 3 shifts, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30-3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there were always 2 of us from 7:30 to midnight. It was a very routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged everything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost peaceful manner. I worked, saved, bought a car, and had planned to move. By late March of 1999, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working all 3 shifts. At night, he was a shadow, working by himself, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights he worked with myself and a female guard named Amira, who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin was about a decade or so older than us. He was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing. There's usually a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and it just wasn't there. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he would ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a bit odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I chalked it up to him just being socially awkward, and that would pass. One night, near the end of his first week, he went on a round with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew there was something wrong. Amira was normally very talkative, but she would barely say a word. I wasn't sure what happened. I waited until Calvin went to the restroom to ask. During their rounds, everything had been normal, until they reached the brass mill. It's a section of the plant that shut down around 6 a.m. There were usually no employees there after that time, and there were no lights on. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood shifted. Amira told me that she turned around only to find he was right on her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing, and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He said something flirtatious to her in a very low voice. When she mentioned his wedding band, he said, "It's gonna be over soon." From then on, I did the rounds, taking Kelvin with me each time. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor, detailing what happened. The next night came and went, with no Kelvin. I did the rounds while Amira stayed in the office. On my second to last shift, I came in to find Amira freaking out. She found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. Apparently he had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned. Parts of her body had been placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night and the next, Amira called the jail just to make sure that they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he even started that job. There is an article linked below. This story didn't happen to me personally. It happened to two of my cousins. They gave me permission to share this story, so I will be telling it from their perspective. My name is Leah. This story happened in April of 2016. I was 29 years old at the time. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. In April, my cousin and I, who I'll refer to as Kate, wanted to go for a Caribbean getaway, but we didn't want to go to the popular tourist destinations, such as the Bahamas, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, or Puerto Rico. So we chose a lesser-known island called Dominica. It's a small island located between Guadeloupe and Martinique, with a population of about 72,000. We booked an Airbnb in the countryside, about 30 minutes away from the capital city. The first 2 weeks went well. We rented a car, and the Airbnb was perfect as it was located near a beach. It was the getaway that we needed. We explored the island, visited several waterfall locations, and even made some friends in the village we were staying at. But on the second day of the third week, something horrible happened. One afternoon, we didn't go out and decided just to spend time at the nearby beach with the locals. Later on, when the people left the beach to go home, Kate wanted to go back to the Airbnb, but I decided to stay there a while longer so I could have some alone time. I closed my eyes and laid down near the beach, enjoying the peace and quiet. I must have dozed off because before I knew it, it was dark, so I decided it was a good time to head back. I arrived at the Airbnb, but as I was getting my keys to unlock the door, two men wearing masks came out of the bushes and started beating me with batons. One even threw a rock at me while I was down, causing me to scream in pain. Kate came out and tried to defend me, but the men also overpowered her. They ran into the Airbnb and ransacked the entire place. Some nearby villagers saw what was happening and quickly came to our aid, but by that time, the two men had already fled. They had taken my laptop, my phone, and my wallet. Luckily for us, our passports weren't stolen. We were both bleeding pretty badly. At some point, I felt like I was going to pass out. The police eventually showed up, and after receiving some medical assistance, we told them what happened. They were shocked. Dominica is usually a pretty safe country. Two of the villagers drove us to the hospital, which was located in the capital city of Roseau. We had to stay in the hospital for a while because our injuries were so bad. We even had to change our return flight. Thankfully, we got out alive. As far as I know, the two perpetrators who attacked us were never caught. This event has forever traumatized Kate and I. However, I still like Dominica and would love to go visit there again someday. But next time, I'll be a lot more cautious.
A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my local town of Ocala, Florida as a delivery driver. Those who are familiar with Central Florida will probably know what I'm talking about. Rolling hills, flatlands, springs, swamps, you name it, Ocala had it all. I was 25, but I made damn good money doing it, as rural families were generally more wealthy than most. I had worked at many other places before, both local and chain, but I favored local businesses more. I'd also like to note that I'm a firm believer in God and thank Him till this day for saving my life. One night I was working and I had an order of 5 large pies to deliver. People don't normally order this much amount of pizza around here, so I could only assume it was a party of some type. My boss wrote down the address for me, and it was on the more busier side of town. This made me feel comfortable, as I typically don't like delivering to rural homes far apart from each other. I'm still not sure why, but that's just how it was. That being said, I do the delivery and drove over to the address, which took me to an apartment complex in town. I had never seen this complex before, as I normally don't go over to the center of town, but I guess it was nice to do deliveries at different locations. I grab the order and go up to the apartment and knock on room 104. This will be important in the story later. I was greeted to a younger guy, I'd say a little younger than me, as well as another guy who appeared to be the same age. Order for Caleb? I said. Without even saying a word, one of the men takes the pizza from me while the other said in a very blunt voice as to how much it was. I tell them the total came out to be $60.83, and the two just look at each other in confusion. One of them spoke up, giving me the side eye as he said that wasn't what he was told over the phone. "Oh, let me double check. Maybe I made a mistake," I said. Okay, so I obviously knew that this had to be the correct amount, as my boss makes us triple check all details, so I knew I had this right. I read over the receipt just to be sure, and lo and behold, I was indeed correct. I show them the receipt for proof, and that's when I see one of them nervously looking around while the other is just staring at me. The very second I was about to say something, one of the men pulls out a gun and points it at my head. At that point, I couldn't even speak or begin to form a sentence for that matter. The kid with the gun says in this really raspy voice to hand him my wallet, keys, and phone or he won't hesitate to pull the trigger. I very nervously said okay and slowly reached into my pockets for all my belongings he requested and handed them to him. They then tell me to come inside slowly and to sit down on one of the chairs by the kitchen table. I comply and walk over to the kitchen where one of them sits me down and proceeds to tie my hands with duct tape. I was pretty much screwed at this point as I couldn't go anywhere as they had the keys to the company car and they sure as hell wouldn't give them back. One of the guys opens my phone and starts to go through it, deleting anything he could find. At one point, I see him land on a picture of my girlfriend, which shocked me to my core. Just a year ago, my girlfriend died in a fatal car crash, and I had photos of her on my phone to keep as memories. Hey, please don't delete those. They're the only thing I have left to remember my girlfriend. However, they didn't seem to care and actually ended up deleting them purely out of spite. I'll admit I got teared up a bit seeing them do that and didn't know what else to do other than to just sit there and watch. I remember sitting there just wondering as to what the hell these people were gonna do to me, and I almost threw up. All the while, I'm praying to God I make it out safe and to let me go from whatever this was. I'd say I kept asking them what they wanted from me several times before one of them just demands for me to shut up. Now, this is the part where things take an unexpected turn. As they were going through my phone while also counting the money in my wallet, we all hear the sound of a window crash in one of the rooms of their apartment. This noise obviously concerned them as they took off running to the room where they heard it. I hear one of them shout, "Who's there?" Had someone broken into their apartment? I thought to myself. What actually happened will leave you speechless. Right then, I knew that this was my chance to leave and start biting off the tape tied around my hands, hoping to rip it off. Somehow I managed to do this and was set free within a few seconds as I was biting down pretty hard. I knew that they would be back any second, and so I just run toward the door and start unlocking the 3 locks that were built into the door. Yeah, no wonder why they don't want anyone finding out about this, I thought to myself. I make it out the door and book it out of the apartment building, not looking back and just trying to find help. It was then when I remembered I didn't have my phone, so I couldn't call the police, so I took that chance to run to the nearest shop. They were thankfully very polite and let me use their phone to call the police. Law enforcement was more professional in Ocala compared to major cities in Florida, so they got here relatively fast. However, when they asked me what room they were in, I couldn't remember the damn room number. This apartment building was huge, with about 100 plus rooms, so I couldn't remember the number. Eventually, I had remembered that I wrote it down, and police then went up to go investigate. Turns out that loud crash we heard was actually a large tree smashing a window. The tree had been broken from the storm and just so happened to fall through the window. As for those 2 men, they were gone. They must have left through the front door when they realized I had already been gone. Needless to say, they were never caught, even after an investigation. Till this day, I feel that tree smashing the window was a distraction made by God to help me escape. I guess it could have been some stroke of luck, but I honestly have no idea. I'm a male, currently 22 and in college going for my bachelor's. I have a part-time job at a hospital, but I also did DoorDash on the side to earn more money. This happened last week during one of my delivery trips, and it's by far the creepiest thing I've ever experienced in my 2+ years of DoorDash. I was out one night with my friend during the middle of the week looking for any orders we could take. Since it was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, there weren't many places open besides fast food. My friend had come along with me as I liked the company, and let's face it, driving alone sucks. Eventually, I get a few orders here and there until I got one that was a little ways away from my normal delivery radius. It was about a 25-minute drive, but at the end of the day, it meant more money in my pocket. Whoever it was ordered from a nearby McDonald's, which was expected at this time of night. That said, I retrieved the order, and before I knew it, we were already halfway to the destination. My GPS led us to one of those terrace homes that always seemed like one big townhouse that you would commonly see. The customer had noted that they wanted it handed to them, which I sort of hated if I'm being honest. Most people would prefer if it were left at the door, but I guess not everyone is the same. My friend and I grabbed the order and started heading toward the door. However, as we were getting ready to ring the doorbell, the door immediately opens where we were greeted to a younger-looking Asian man. He appeared to be in his late 20s or early 30s and was absolutely stoned. However, he was still stable and was able to make conversation with us, and he actually seemed pretty cool at first. He asked us how our night was, how old we were, and where we went to school. You know, casual small talk questions. Granted, he had somewhat of a small accent, but we could still understand what he was saying. After about a good 5 minutes of chatting, we hand him his order and he just puts it on the table next to him and says something we didn't expect. Still stoned out of his mind, he asks us if we'd be interested in having a beer with him. I look at my friend and he sort of just shrugs and says sure. Normally I'd say no, but seeing as to how chill this guy was, we didn't think anything of it. We walk into the house and he hands us each a cold beer and proceeds to start up an actual conversation with us, mostly about his life. At one point, he gets up and tells us to wait as he says he has to step out to take a quick phone call. The man steps into another room and shuts the door behind him. So there we were, just chilling while talking to my friend when I hear the man speaking Japanese in another room. Now, my stepmother is from Japan, so while I understand a fair bit of Japanese, I don't speak it. So I hear him talking but pay no attention because it's rude to eavesdrop and all. That was until he said something along the lines of, "The people in my kitchen won't find out." That's when my ears perk up. To put it simply, he was basically talking to someone on the phone and how he was planning on keeping us silent just in case. That was enough to quietly tell my friend what was going on and that we had to leave. However, as we got up, he comes back out and sees the look on our faces, and it was at that point where he had caught on. His face went from a friendly smile to a disappointed look, as if he knew we had hurt him. I tell him that it was nice to meet him, but that we had to go. He said nothing and just watches us as we walk out the door, not saying a word. As soon as we start the car, we see him come out of the house waving a gun like a madman. He fires 2 shots into my front fender of my car before we hightail it out of there. All the while, my friend is crying as he swore a bullet ripped through his seat. We drive for about 10 minutes before I call the police to explain my situation. After giving a description of this man to the police, they had sent in squads of police units to the address. Turns out, this guy was a member of the Japanese Yakuza and was wanted for murder and importing illegal goods into the US. He used an alias for about 4 years and was somehow never caught. I don't know about you, but encountering a mafia member is probably the scariest thing that can happen to anyone. Shortly after entering his home, they had ended his life on the spot. For starters, authorities had found several files on his computer and even found drugs and weapons inside these crates he had locked away. All of these things were obviously highly illegal, and police even went as far as locking down the whole neighborhood. I'm not sure why they did this, but I guess that's just how these things work. The craziest thing about this is the fact that I fed him his last meal. That still bothers me for some reason till this day. My name is Alex, and this happened just yesterday late last night with my girlfriend. For a very brief 4 months or so, I worked as a delivery driver for a few food delivery apps at the time, mostly being active on Uber Eats and DoorDash, as those were the ones that tended to be more popular. I didn't expect to make big money from this side hustle, but it helped with other small things like groceries and utilities. I live in the suburbs of LA, which is a very crowded part of the city, so deliveries were usually quick and close. Anyway, this happened last night while my girlfriend and I were doing deliveries. We had just gotten home from a friend's party, and while most people would be exhausted, we were surprisingly still active. Not knowing what to do, my girlfriend and I decided we'd go out and do a few deliveries just to have some us time. Being in the car with a loved one always felt like a special sort of vibe. Anyway, almost immediately, someone requested a large order from a local Wingstop, and I was the one who accepted it. Big orders usually meant that the customer would have to tip more, aka more money for me. We drive to the location, and I tell my girlfriend to wait in the car while I go get the food. Now, Wingstop usually takes a bit of time before the order is ready, which meant I had to wait a few minutes. Once the food had been done, I grab it and start heading back to the car when I see my girlfriend is stoned as a statue. She's sitting in the front seat with her eyes wild and had a look of fear. At first, I was confused as to why she was like that and motioned for her to roll down the window while asking her what the hell happened. She slowly flicks the button and tells me in a shook voice to get in the car. I do just that, and we drove over to the destination while I continued to ask what was wrong. After what felt like forever, she finally tells me everything, and what she told me made my stomach drop. As I was inside the restaurant waiting for the food, my girlfriend had been on her phone texting a friend when she looks out the window. Practically hovering over the window was a very large and tall man who looked to be at least 6'7". He wore all black and was staring at my girlfriend with this very angry look, and in his hand was a window smasher. His face was red and his eyes were menacing, as if he had this strong hatred towards my girlfriend. However, she couldn't move or say anything. She simply turned to face the front and hoped that he'd just leave. After about a decent minute, he thankfully did, and that was when I had come out of the restaurant. Now, there's no real way to say this without trying to brag, but my girlfriend is very pretty. Like, she's cute, and her looks would oftentimes attract a lot of faces. My theory was that the man who had come up to the car had seen her and knew she was with me, as he had probably been watching us. We didn't really bother calling the police, as there wasn't really something to be done about it. After that, we had called it a night and went straight home, as she couldn't shake off the paranoia. Up until now, I'm still not exactly sure as to what the man wanted or what his intentions were, but if he had a device to break windows, they couldn't have been good. From now on, my girlfriend and I have agreed that whenever we do orders together, that we'd both be the ones to go inside.
I'm a male, and I was around 8 or 9 when this happened. Obviously, I don't remember much since I was a kid, so I had recently asked my mom what she remembered about that day. My mom was taking my sister and I to see a movie. We had decided to stop at McDonald's to kill some time. A strange guy wearing a purple suit had followed us in and had sat at a nearby table without ordering anything. After we finished eating, I had got up to go clean up my retainer in the bathroom sink. The man followed me into the bathroom and then stood between me and the door. He asked me if I wanted a juice box. I said no, but he had told me that I needed to go out to his car with him so I could pick out the flavor. My parents had drilled into my head to never ever go with a stranger, so I immediately knew what was happening. I ran past him and out of the bathroom door into the lobby, then told my mom what had happened. He had followed me out and started coming towards us. My mom stood up and started making a big scene. She had loudly asked him why he was trying to get her son to go out to his car with him. He said that he was just trying to give me a juice box, and then hurriedly left and then got into his car and drove off. Luckily, there was a police car in the parking lot, so we had waved down a cop and told him what had happened. Unfortunately, the man in the purple suit was long gone by this point. I had forgotten most of what had happened before and after the incident, but I still vividly remember the terror I felt being alone in the bathroom with him blocking the door. It was only 10 to 20 seconds, but I'll never forget that uneasy feeling. I'm really grateful that my mom was such a rock star and that she knew how to make a scene to scare him off. I have no idea what would have happened to me had I actually gone out there with him. I'm a 17-year-old female, and I recently quit my job at a fast food chain after working there for almost 10 months. This story is part of the reason why I didn't want to stay much longer. I worked the drive-thru from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. almost every weekend. Seeing regulars was not uncommon for me, and I would even memorize most of their orders and fill it out as soon as I heard their voice. Most were very polite and occasionally tipped, but on one particularly busy day, there was an unfamiliar, weary presence. I had just started my shift, so I was running food to the window. I had made eye contact with the man at the window in his car and immediately felt uneasy. I brushed it off because we were busy and I had work to do. Later on, once my manager set up my cash drawer, I took over drive-thru orders, payments, etc. There were lots of orders, so I wasn't paying special attention to specific voices or menu choices, but one had caught my attention. It was a low, hesitant voice asking for a sandwich. I give the man the total and he waits in line. He arrives at the window and it's the man from earlier. I assumed that he just forgot to order something. Now, his car was pretty low to the ground, so he had to extend his arm out to hand me his debit card. As he does this, he then mumbles something under his breath without even breaking eye contact with me. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I question him. "I said you're looking beautiful today." At this point, I'm super uncomfortable. Not only do I have a boyfriend, but I'm also underage and I'm not interested at all. Thank you," I said nervously. I then handed him the bag of food and then quickly shut the window until he drove away. I half-heartedly complained about him to some coworkers, all male as we usually do with weird customers, but I still had a strange gut feeling. A little while later, when the average wait in our line was about 10 minutes, I hear a familiar voice over the mic asking for a cup of water. It was low but agitated and forceful. I saw his face through the windshield and walked away from the window so that my manager would take care of him. This happened a couple of more times that day, asking for straws and other free things. At that point, I was pretty sure that he was just trying to look at me. I was so frustrated with him and the rest of my workday that I went to the bathroom and just cried. I usually have pretty thick skin when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I was just so over it. The rest of the night went on and I didn't see him again. I thought that I'd probably never see him again. That is, until my very last shift at the store a few months later. We weren't very busy that evening, but it was much later in the day than the first encounter. I didn't recognize the voice, but I had immediately recognized his face and car. I just swallowed my pride and took his payment, trying not to make eye contact. I had called my manager and he said he would give the food out for me. As suspected, the man was back in the drive-thru not long afterwards for a cup of water. This time I knew better. I had sent a male coworker to the window to get it for him since I was busy anyway. Once given the water, the man had actually asked my coworker,
"So, you guys close at 11 now, right?"
I was so glad that I was getting picked up by my mom that night. I was constantly looking out the windows, just making sure that he wasn't out there waiting for me. Call me paranoid, but I listened to enough true crime to be overly cautious.
In early 2004, I worked as a pizza delivery driver in a small town of New Jersey. We were known to be the best pizza in town and relatively new, so the store got a lot of orders from locals. Hell, we even got orders outside of our delivery radius. We were that popular. Anyway, it was a Wednesday night if I remember correctly, and we hadn't received many orders due to it being a weeknight. When business was slow, my boss would allow us to go in the computer in the back room if we had nothing to do. Mind you, this was 2004, so the computer in the back room was really the only form of entertainment we had. At some point, I had been online playing on one of those internet browser games when the store got a call. On the other end was an elderly man asking for a medium pie. It was only 15 minutes away, and it wasn't a busy night, so I had no problem doing that drive. Now, let's fast forward to when I was on the road. I had decided to take a shortcut through some smaller back roads that I had never taken before. According to my GPS, the back roads would get me to my destination about 5 minutes before, so I couldn't go wrong with that. I remember taking a right and made my way onto the road that would lead me to where I needed to go. There were trees on both sides of this road, and you couldn't see anything more than 4 feet in front of you. I'll admit, it was a bit spooky navigating through this road, but I had dismissed it as me being paranoid due to the eerie nature of it. Suddenly, about 2 to 3 minutes later, my headlights catch someone crawling onto the road soaking wet. I yell out an "oh shit" and swerve around this person, making sure to not hit them. When I look in my rearview mirror, I see this person stand up and just stare down as I drive by. After getting a decent look, I came to the realization that it was a woman drenched in water. There was a river right next to this road, so I could only assume she had gotten out from there and onto the road seeking help. But her appearance and the way she crawled out from the trees was so abnormal and definitely had me shaken up. I made it to the customer's house and was given a $10 tip for my service. On the way back, I had taken the same route hoping to find the woman, but never did. This was ultimately the creepiest thing I've ever encountered in my years of delivering food, and nothing ever became of that woman.
Austin was a college student who worked at a small local pizza place and got delivery right before closing. When he took down their address, he saw it was a bad area of town and thought to himself jokingly, "I'm probably going to get robbed." The order was less than $20, but they asked if he could give change for $100, and he said no. Well, I'm probably definitely getting robbed, he thought, still joking to himself. He drove to the neighborhood, not somewhere you'd want to be after 1 a.m., pulled up to the house. There were no lights on anywhere, but he could see an outline of two people sitting on that dimly lit porch. Oh my God, I might actually get robbed, he kept thinking to himself. He walked up to the dark house and approached the two men on the porch to deliver the food. One of them was comically short. "So, do you have change for the 100? One of them asked. Austin said no and reminded them he had told them this over the phone. They said nothing. The short guy went inside the still dark house to get money. Austin stood outside awkwardly with the other man, who just stared at him wordlessly. 2 minutes passed, then 5 minutes, then 10. The pizza was already starting to get cold. The house was still pitch black inside. The other guy just kept staring at Austin. Austin had a bad feeling and began to feel genuinely uncomfortable. He looked at his cell phone clock and saw his shift should have ended a little while back. Feeling freaked out, he told the guy, "Well, my shift is over and I have to get home. Consider the pizza free." He turned around and started to walk off the porch back to his car. About halfway there, the porch light came on and he heard the door shut, and for a split second remembered seeing both their shadows, one long and one comically short. A half a second later, he heard a swooping sound as they both leapt off the porch. A half second later, one guy grabbed Austin by the arm and pulled a knife on him. The short one held his other arm. "You're not going anywhere," he said. The first thought to go through Austin's head was that he was right about being robbed. The second was that this was a horrible way to say thank you for a free pizza. Now, Austin had taken martial arts lessons in the past, but he had no practice. He was strong and stubborn. In the heat of the moment, he tore his arm free from the short man and used his pizza bag as a shield against the knife, and turned and tried to do some kind of Mortal Kombat move on the side of the guy's face. He said, in fact, afterwards, it seemed like a better idea in his head. Austin missed the side of the man's head, and his fingers plunged straight into the guy's eye socket. Austin freaked out at holding what felt like a grape and pulled his hand away, and then inadvertently popped the guy's eyeball out of the socket. You read that right. All three of them started screaming at the same time. The one guy because his eye just been torn out of its socket, Austin because he realized what he had just done, and the short guy because he had just witnessed the whole thing, and ran screaming into the darkness somewhere behind the house. Austin picked up the dropped knife and called 911 while the guy lay writhing on the walkway. Upon telling the operator what had transpired, about 5 police cars showed up. The officers think the situation's hilarious, calling the man on the ground a pirate. They ask Austin to describe the short guy, and he does. And one of them says, "Hang on." The two disappear behind the house. 10 minutes later, they come back with him. They all know this man. Evidently, they had been to his house many times before, and he was a repeat offender. Austin went to the police station to give a statement, where several employees in earshot asked him to relay the story again. Austin received a nice raise and worked at the same pizza place until he graduated.
I work full-time as a pizza delivery driver for a relatively popular pizza chain. I've done this for almost a year now, as I'm putting what money I made to pay for college. Don't ask me how I can manage both my job and school at the same time because, to tell you the truth, I have no idea. I would work mostly during the week, so I would constantly be doing deliveries left and right. Also, I live in Savannah, Georgia, so I'd pretty much be doing it every second. I had just returned to the restaurant after a good 3 hours of doing deliveries, only to get another one. Thankfully, it wasn't too far of a drive, and it was only one pie, so I felt relieved I didn't have to do much. I bring the pizza to the car and input the address into my phone. Out of curiosity, I copy and paste the address into Google Earth just to see what the house was like. For whatever reason, I've always had the habit of doing this, even if it felt stalkerish. The house was this older, rundown, two-storied mansion made of red brick. An absolute dream of a house if it had been maintained better. Right away, I started to get excited, as wealthier people tend to tip more than most. I was at the house within about 10 minutes, with the pizza still hot so the customer would be satisfied. Let me tell you, you don't understand how many people would complain if their pizza came even slightly cold. I walk up to the house and ring the doorbell, and that's when I hear slow footsteps coming to the door and then stopping. "Delivery for Dan?" I yelled out. There was silence for a good minute. However, I knew someone was behind the door, so they could definitely hear me. Mind you, it's about 40 degrees outside, so the longer I waited, the colder the pizza got. Finally, I heard the door unlock and was greeted to an older woman staring at me. For a second, I thought I had the wrong house, as the person who placed the order was a man. Out of nowhere, she begins to speak, saying that Dan was her son and that he had just left the house and that he'd be back. In the meantime, she had invited me inside, where it was a lot warmer. As much as it felt wrong, it was getting colder by the minute, and I actually accepted. I step inside and realized that it wasn't as warm as she said it was. Maybe a little warm, but definitely not by a landslide. She had offered me something to eat while I waited, but our policy states that we couldn't accept food from customers. I waited in that house, still freezing my ass off for a good 10 minutes before telling her that I'd just leave the pizza here. She gave me a nod and watched me as I proceeded to open the front door. The second I did, I heard the most blood-curdling shriek coming from upstairs that echoed across the house. I look upstairs into the pitch-black darkness and then back at the woman, who then said something that made my blood run cold.
"I think it's time for you to leave, hon."
However, her sentence is not what scared me the most. It was her tone, the way she said it, almost as if it was a warning to leave now. You bet your life I was out of that house in seconds, not caring about any sort of tip or pay at this point. Fear is not enough to describe what I felt. You had to be there to hear what I heard. It didn't even sound human. I basically floored it down the road, not looking back, while calling my manager about it. I could tell he was in a bitchy mood and just told me to keep delivering orders and not to worry about it. As much as I wanted to call the police, I felt that I could have lost my job had I done so. The rest of my day went by as usual, with only one complaint about the incorrect toppings. Other than that, I made a bag with tips at the end of the day. This was about a week ago, and I still have no idea what made that screaming noise upstairs. I'd like to think that it was some sort of sick joke that was being played, but maybe that's because I'd rather not think of the alternative.
I'll never forget this night. The pizza place I worked at was about to close, and I was getting ready to go home when the phone rang. I was working the counter alone that night, so I was taking calls. I picked up the phone. There was complete silence, so I hung up. About a minute later, the phone rang again, so I picked up. Still silence. I was about to hang up again when I heard the very weak and cold voice of an old woman on the other end. She said she wanted a regular pie delivered. I remained polite on the phone, but on the inside I was screaming. I just wanted to get home and end my shift. I called out to my boss that someone was requesting a delivery, and of course, guess what? He told me I had to go. I was upset at first, but I realized it was another tip, and the old ones usually tip the most, so I decided to go through with it. I wrote down the address, told her it would be there soon, but she had already hung up the phone. I thought to myself how rude that was, but I ignored it and yelled to the chef that I needed one more regular. My boss told me to just go home after the delivery, as the place would be closed. So a little before 10 o'clock, I got in my car, put the address and the GPS on my phone. The house was 7 miles away. The GPS took me to the quiet side of town. I arrived at the house. It was a small one-floor home on a very quiet and empty street. I took the pizza and walked up to the door and rang the doorbell. There were no lights on in the house. I hoped that she hadn't given me the wrong address. I rang the doorbell again. There was still no answer. I was about to give up when I turned my head and saw someone standing at the window. I got a little freaked out and backed up at first, but I eventually got closer to the window to see a person. It was an old woman, probably in her late 70s. She was just staring at me with a blank expression. I yelled at her through the glass that I had her pizza. She didn't react to what I said, so I screamed it louder. A large smile ran across her face. Not a pleasant, genuine smile. It was a smile that sent chills down my entire spine. I still remember that exact same face she made through the window. I decided that I was freaked out enough and got back to my car and set the pizza down in the passenger seat. I had to text my boss about this. After I shot him a quick message, I started my car ready to get the hell out of there. I looked to my right to get one more look to see the woman, standing right outside my passenger side window, giving me the same stare she'd given me before. Put my car in drive and floored it down the street, never looking back. My boss never made me do a late night delivery again.
Delivering food at night is usually peaceful. The roads are clear, there's no rush, and you just hop from one house to another, dropping off burgers and pizzas while listening to music or podcasts. I've always liked it. It's kind of meditative, actually. Just me, the dark streets, and my thoughts. But that night felt different, and not in a good way. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., and I'd been driving for a few hours. I only had one more order to deliver before I called it a night. It wasn't a long run, just another drop-off at some out-of-the-way spot on the edge of town. You know how it is, long roads with no one around, houses way spread out, and no streetlights anywhere. It was a pizza and a soda. Easy. I grabbed the food from the restaurant, threw it in the passenger seat, and punched the address into my GPS. It was about 15 minutes away. I figured I'd drop it off, maybe get a nice tip, and then head home. I started driving, the streets quickly getting quieter as I left the busier parts of town behind. It was one of those clear nights, the sky pitch black except for a few stars. All I could hear was my engine humming and the trees rustling when the wind kicked up. The further I drove, the emptier the roads became, with houses becoming more spaced out until they pretty much disappeared entirely. Normally, this wouldn't bother me. I like the isolation at night, but something about this particular drive felt off. I was maybe 5 minutes into the drive when I noticed a car behind me. It wasn't tailgating or anything. It was keeping a fair distance, but I could see the headlights in my rearview mirror, and for some reason, that bugged me. I looked at the road ahead, empty, and then back at the car. It was strange seeing another vehicle out here this late. I tried to shake it off. Plenty of people drive late at night. Maybe they were headed in the same direction. Shouldn't be a problem, right? I kept driving, the car still behind me, always at the same distance. It wasn't close enough to feel like it was tailing me, but it wasn't far enough to feel like a coincidence either. I figured maybe they'd pass me eventually. But they didn't. They just stayed there, like a shadow, always a few car lengths behind. I looked at the GPS, 10 minutes to go. I could handle 10 more minutes of this. As the minutes ticked by, I started to feel the tension creeping in. That car was still behind me, keeping pace no matter how fast or slow I went. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe they lived out here too. Maybe they were just headed home, just like me. But something about it wasn't sitting right. I made a turn onto a smaller road, not the kind with only one lane in each direction and barely any shoulder to pull over on. The road twisted and turned, dipping into small valleys and rising back up again, with thick woods on either side. The kind of road where it feels like you're the only person for miles. Except I wasn't alone. The headlights were still there, still following, as steady as ever. I got that gut feeling, the one that screams something's off, even if you can't figure out why. I checked the GPS again. 5 minutes left, just 5 more minutes. I took another turn, this time onto a road that was barely lit. The trees on either side closing in like a tunnel. The car behind me took the turn too. Now I couldn't shake it anymore. There was no way they were just casually going in the same direction. I wasn't even sure this road led to anywhere else. I sped up, trying to put some distance between us, but the car sped up too. That was it. No more rationalizing. I was being followed. My heart was racing. What the hell did they want? Were they trying to rob me? Was it some psycho messing with me? I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just keep driving and hope they'd lose interest. I wasn't going to lead them to the customer's house either. No way. So I made a split-second decision. Up ahead, I saw a small dirt road branching off the main one. I didn't know where it led, but it didn't matter. I turned the wheel hard, veering onto the dirt road without thinking. The tires skidded on the gravel, kicking up dust as I sped down the narrow path, the headlights behind me disappearing for a second as I rounded the bend. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. For a brief moment, I thought I'd lost them. But then, just as quickly as they'd vanished, the headlights appeared again, bouncing over the uneven terrain as the car turned onto the same dirt road. I let out a low curse. This wasn't going to be easy. The dirt road twisted and turned, narrowing even more as I drove deeper into the woods. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop. The other car was getting closer, the headlights growing brighter in the rearview mirror. They were catching up. I tried to stay calm, keep my focus on the road ahead, but the fear was clawing its way up, making it harder to think straight. I could hear the tires crunching over the gravel, the branches scraping against the side of my car as I sped past. The road ahead split into two paths. I had no idea where either of them went, but I didn't have time to think. I took the left path, hoping it would lead somewhere, anywhere, that would get me out of this mess. The car behind me took the right path. For a second, I didn't understand what had just happened. Why hadn't they followed me? Why had they taken the other path? But then, it hit me. They didn't need to follow me. They knew these roads better than I did. They were cutting me off. The moment I realized what was happening, my heart was beating out of my chest. They were going to loop around and block me off. I slammed on the gas, pushing my car to its limit as I tore down the winding dirt road, the trees blurring past me. I had to get out of here. I had to find a way back to the main road before they could cut me off. But the road was getting rougher, the ruts and rocks making it harder to keep control. I could feel the car struggling, the wheels skidding on the loose dirt. Up ahead, I saw the trees thinning out, the road starting to straighten. I was almost there, almost back to safety. And then, just as I thought I was in the clear, I saw it. The car was there, parked sideways across the road, blocking my path. The headlights were off, but I could see the dark outline of the vehicle, waiting for me. They had gotten there first. I hit the brakes, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a stop just a few feet away from the other car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing for a way out. There was no turning around. The road was too narrow and they'd catch up with me before I could get far. I looked at the car blocking the road, but I couldn't see who was inside. The windows were tinted and the headlights were still off. It was just sitting there, silent, waiting. And then the driver's side door opened. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas, backing up as fast as I could without losing control. The car in front of me didn't move, but I could feel the tension, like something was about to snap. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. The dirt road was bumpy, my car jolting with every turn, but I kept going, not daring to look back. I could hear the engine of the other car revving behind me, but I didn't stop. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the main road ahead. The trees opened up, the dirt road giving way to asphalt. I sped onto the road without looking, my tires screeching as I merged back onto the highway. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the darkness of the woods far behind me. I never found out who was in that car or why they were following me. Maybe they were just messing with me, trying to scare me. Or maybe it was something worse. All I know is that I didn't want to find out. I kept driving, not stopping until I was back in town, the lights of the city making me feel a little safer. But even now, whenever I drive down those dark, empty roads at night, I keep checking the rearview mirror, waiting for those damn headlights to appear again. Because out there in the dark, you never know who's following you, or why.
My story isn't crazy long, but it's one of the wildest things that's ever happened to me.
I still think about it now and how close I came to getting ripped off by people I thought were my friends, so here we go. It was a Friday night a few years back. I was supposed to go out with Ethan, Marcus, and a few other buddies. Just some bar hopping, nothing major. But that afternoon, I got hit with something nasty, fever, chills, full body sweats. My stomach twisted itself into knots, and the thought of even standing up, let alone drinking, made me want to puke on the spot. I shot Ethan a text and told him I'm out for the night. He hit me back with a laughing emoji, called me soft. I told him to have a drink for me and crashed on my couch, with Netflix playing in the background. I must have dozed off because the next time I looked at my phone, it was well past midnight. My fever had eased up a little bit, but my body still felt wrung out. The TV flickered in the dark, some show playing I can't even remember putting on. I barely even had the energy to sit up, so I just let my eyes unfocus, sinking in and half out of sleep. And then I heard this metallic scrape. At first, I thought it was the TV, some weird sound effect, but when I turned the volume down, I heard it again. And this time, it was followed by whispering outside. My body went rigid, whispering. Low, hushed voices just outside my door. My mind quickly scrambled for some kind of explanation. Was it the neighbors or maybe drunk kids messing around? But then I heard that metallic scrape again, but it was longer this time, like something being dragged across my lock. My stomach quickly turned to ice. I slid off the couch, moving slowly and carefully. The TV cast just enough light to keep me from tripping as I crept towards the front room. I pressed my back against the wall near the window, took a deep breath, and then just barely peeked through the side of the curtain. Two men, dressed in dark clothes, both wearing ski masks. One was hunched over my front door, working at the lock with something thin and metallic, a lockpick. The other stood a few feet back, glancing around, shifting from foot to foot like he was really nervous. My throat locked up immediately. This ain't a prank. This is real. I stumbled back from the window and fumbled for my phone. My hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked it and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, voice steady and professional.
911, what's your emergency?
There's two guys outside my house. I swallowed hard. They're trying to break in.
Can you confirm your address, sir?
I gave it to her, whispering. My body felt electric, every nerve on edge.
Where are they in the house?
Front room. I can see them through the window. I don't think they know I'm home.
Stay quiet. Officers are en route.
I peered back through the curtain, breathing barely. The guy at the door continued to jiggle the knob, muttering something. I could just make out his voice now, rough and impatient. But at the same time, it was familiar. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. I knew that voice. I told the dispatcher, barely even believing my own words. I think I know one of them. There was a pause on the other end.
You recognize him?
I mean, I can't see his face, but his voice? My mouth went dry. Yeah, I do.
Were you supposed to be out tonight, sir?
That question hit me like a slap. I blinked, my brain working slower than it probably should have been. Yeah, I whispered. I was supposed to be out tonight. The dispatcher's tone then sharpened.
It's not uncommon for burglars to plan jobs based on when they know somebody won't be home. You may have been targeted by somebody you know.
A cold weight then settled in my gut. I stared at the guy at the door, his build, his movements, the way he was shifting when he got frustrated. Every part of him was screaming something I didn't want to believe. Ethan. That realization made my skin crawl. My friend? A guy I was supposed to be out drinking with. He thought I wasn't home. He thought my house was empty. The dispatcher kept talking, telling me to stay on the line, but I wasn't listening. I hung up and called Ethan. Outside, I saw his phone light up in his pocket. He froze. The other guy just looked at him, confused. Ethan hesitated and stared at his phone for a second. Then, instead of answering, he sent it to voicemail. My stomach twisted and I called again. This time he didn't even check, just let it ring. I swallowed down the fear and that rage bubbling up underneath my skin. I typed out a text with shaking fingers. I'm home and I can see you. Ethan checked his phone and stared at the screen, and then bolted. I watched him and the other guy sprint down the street, their dark figures vanishing into the night. But they didn't make it far. The second they hit the driveway, red and blue lights flashed and sirens ripped out through the air. The cops were already here. The moment the sirens hit, Ethan and his accomplice skidded to a stop, and for a split second, they looked at one another, then bolted in opposite directions. It didn't matter though, the cops were already fanning out, voices barking commands. Hands where I can see them! Down on the ground now! Ethan hesitated just for a second, then dropped to his knees, hands in the air. His friend wasn't as smart. He made it halfway across my neighbor's yard before two officers tackled him hard into the grass. I stood there frozen at my window, watching it all unfold. It really didn't feel real. The same guy I shared drinks with, laughs with, confided in, was now cuffed, face down on the pavement. A few moments later, the officers knocked on my door. I let him in, and my legs were still feeling like they weren't attached to my body. I gave my statement and recounted everything that I saw. The whole time, my voice was distant, like I was telling somebody else's story. It turns out Ethan and his buddy weren't first-timers. They were tied to a string of break-ins across the town. Small stuff mostly, electronics, cash, anything that could flip quick. He'd been robbing houses for months and months now, including mine apparently. The reality of it all didn't hit me until after the cops left and my house was quiet again. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and then sat in the dark staring at my phone. I don't really know what I was waiting for. A follow-up for the police or my friends, really anything, but nobody reached out. I sat up for most of the night totally perplexed, half paranoid. It was a really weird feeling. I ended up just taking more cold and flu medicine and forced myself to pass back out. Over the next few weeks, I distanced myself from some of the more sketchy friends I'd made over the years and got all the info I could on Ethan. He went away for a few months, maybe a year, but he's out and about again. He even tried apologizing to me, but I still don't talk to him. Folks like that definitely aren't worth the trouble. I didn't think twice about that night when it started. It was just one of those evenings, that same routine that I'd done 100 times before. I got off work early, one of those rare miracles that really didn't happen very often, but I didn't question it. Picked up Darcy from the babysitter, buckled her up into the car seat while she babbled along about the cool stuff that she did that day. The usual. The house was dark when I got home, the late autumn chill creeping in. Darcy clung to her stuffed rabbit as I carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind us. The house smelled like garbage, adding to the list of stuff I needed to get done. I flicked on the lights and sat her down and shrugged off my coat. I was just about to start dinner when my phone buzzed. Hey, I'm gonna be late at least another hour. Of course. I sighed, stuffing my phone back into my pocket. That left me alone with Darcy, longer than expected. I guess not a big deal, but I was already tired. I just needed to get the house together. Okay, kiddo, I said, scooping her up. Let's get you set up so mommy can get rolling. I plopped her in front of the living room with a sippy cup and her toys, turning on something animated to keep her occupied. She giggled, completely unaware that my energy was running on fumes. The kitchen was cold, even with the oven on. I moved throughout the motions, chopping vegetables and setting water to boil, that kind of mindless task that you do on autopilot. My phone buzzed again, another text from Tyler. As I typed out a reply, I heard something from the living room, this soft thump. I thought for a second, maybe I dropped a package of pork chops on the floor. No, they were still on the counter. Okay, well, maybe Darcy knocked something over, one of her toys. But then a few seconds later, I heard something else, something closer to a jingle. I turned my head, frowning. All right, something's off. I stood there for a moment, knife still in hand, trying to listen past the sound of boiling water. The house went back to quiet again, No thumps, no jingling. Maybe I imagined it. I shook my head and went back to chopping. Pulse just a little quicker now. Tyler texted me again. I'm sorry, I'm ready to be home. What's for dinner? I started typing back when another sound reached me. Not a thump this time, this kind of whoosh, like air moving where it shouldn't be. I turned my head towards the living room. A breeze? I could feel it now, drifting into the kitchen, sending a cold draft across the back of my neck. I dropped my phone. The front door was open, wide open. The next second was pure electric panic. My stomach flipped. I ran, nearly knocking over a chair. Darcy? My voice cracked as I burst into the living room. Empty. The sippy cup was on its side, dripping milk into the carpet. Her stuffed rabbit lay abandoned near the couch. The front door gaped open to the night, a dark mouth swallowing up my child. I ran to the threshold, heart slamming, eyes darting across the yard. The porch light wasn't even on. Pure black and no Darcy. My brain couldn't perceive or process it. 1 second she was there and the next, gone. I staggered out into the porch barefoot, cold slapping at my legs. I screamed her name into the night. Darcy, baby, where are you? No answer. I ran down the steps and scanned the yard, the driveway, the sidewalk. My pulse was roaring in my ears. Could she have gone toward the street, the backyard? My mind raced through every horrible possibility. And then I heard movement, a rustle from beneath the porch. I spun, breath sharp in my throat. I dropped to my hands and knees, peering through the lattice work. There she was. Darcy crouched against the foundation, wide-eyed and silent. Her tiny hands clutched her shirt, but she wasn't crying, just staring. Baby, I gasped out. My voice was shaking. Come here, come to mommy. She didn't move. I reached for her, trying to stay calm, but then I saw it, the thing in the shadows just a foot away from her. A skunk. Its black and white shape curled tight, tail raised, nose twitching as it watched me with these beady little eyes. The pulse slammed harder. Darcy was trapped. One move from getting sprayed, or even worse, bitten. My hands curled into fists, and I forced myself to breathe. Panic would not help. Darcy, sweetheart, I whispered. Don't move, okay? Just stay still. She just blinked at me, as if waiting for my next move. I twisted around, hearing footsteps, chest seizing up. It was Tyler jogging up the driveway, confusion written all over his face. Jesus, what the hell's going on? He panted out, and somehow I didn't hear him pull up to the house. I pointed under the porch. It's Darcy, she's stuck and there's a... The skunk shifted, and my breath caught. Don't startle it, I hissed to him. Tyler crouched beside me, peering into the darkness. Shit. Slowly, he straightened up and reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his keys. I didn't know what he was doing until he aimed, pressed the button, and set off the car alarm. That blaring sound shattered the quiet. The skunk flinched, and its tails flicked up and then gone. A streak of black and white shooting out from underneath the porch, vanishing into the bushes. Darcy then let out this startled little yelp, and that's all I needed. I lunged forward and grabbed her and yanked her in my arms, stumbling backwards into the grass. She clung to me, her tiny body trembling. I pressed my lips to her hair, whispering, "You scared me so bad, baby." My whole body felt like it had been hollowed out, shaking with the leftover adrenaline. Tyler bent down and checked her face and her arms. She okay? I nodded. I think so. Then that smell hit me, something burning. Tyler's eyes went wide. Dinner. I turned and stared through the open door, smoke curling from the kitchen. The pot on the stove, whatever I was cooking, was now in flames. We ran inside. Tyler grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink while I yanked that smoking pot off the burner. My hands were shaking so hard that I almost dropped it. Flames hissed and died as Tyler let out a blast of white foam, coating the stove, the counter, and half the floor. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. That smell of burned food filling up the house. For a second, nobody spoke. We just stood there panting, Darcy still clinging to my hip. And Tyler let out this short, breathless laugh. Whew. Hell of a night. I wanted to laugh too, but it didn't come. My body was still buzzing from the panic of losing Darcy, from that skunk, from nearly setting our house on fire. I turned and pressed my forehead to Darcy's soft curls, inhaling her scent, that baby shampoo and sweat. We need to check her, I murmured. Make sure she didn't get bitten. Tyler nodded and reached out to brush a hand over her back. No scratches, no blood. We still stripped her down and tossed her into the bath, just to be safe. She was sleepy now, the whole ordeal already fading in her little mind. By the time we got her dried off and into the pajamas, she was nodding off in my arms. I sat with her in the rocking chair, staring out the window into the dark yard, my pulse finally slowing down. Tyler walked up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. He's okay now. I nodded, but deep down I knew. Those 30 minutes were the longest, most terrifying of my entire life. And thank God Tyler just happened to get home a little earlier than expected. Never left that door unlocked again, I'll tell you that.
I've been hiking for a few years now, and one evening I went hiking on a trail I've done before, which I considered my favorite. It's well known for its beautiful views, and I had planned on a simple evening hike. I wasn't expecting it to take too long, so I didn't bring much, just water, a few snacks, and my phone. As the evening went on, the weather turned cooler. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and I knew it would be getting dark soon. I had planned to stick to the main path, but I decided to take a shortcut that would get me back to the car a little faster. I'd done it before without issue. This time though, the shortcut led me into unfamiliar terrain. The woods were denser here, daylight was fading quickly, and I had to have made a wrong turn or missed a turn at some point. At first, I didn't panic because I thought I could still find my way, but as I kept walking, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The path was barely a trail now, just some faint markings in the dirt that I could barely follow. My phone had no signal, and when I tried calling for help, it just showed that dreaded no service message. It was already getting darker, and I wasn't sure where I was anymore. Right as it was getting dark, I saw an old shack up ahead of me. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years, but it also didn't look like it had fallen apart. The door was slightly open, and nobody was inside, so I decided to go in. It seemed like a strange thing to find out here, but at that point, I didn't have many options. I figured I could use it for shelter for the night until morning when I could see the woods better. The shack was small, with old wooden walls. There was some broken furniture, a dusty table, and a few old crates scattered around on the carpet that covered the ground. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting outside in the dark. I locked the door behind me and settled into the corner with my bag as a pillow, lying on top of the carpet so that I had at least a little padding. Around midnight, I began hearing noises. It was faint, but there were noises now and then coming from below the shack. At first, I thought an animal had made its home under the shack, but as the night went on, I heard a lot of different noises, some louder scrapes, or just overall rustling around. I was confused, but tried to ignore the faint noises as I drifted in and out of sleep throughout the night. It all came together for me when suddenly I heard loud steps ascending towards me in the middle of the night. There was a lower level below me, like a bunker in the ground. As the steps worked their way towards me, I felt a slight push below. I realized I was laying right over the entrance to down below, which must have been a trapdoor below the carpet that I was laying on. I shouted out hello, kind of out of instinct, and didn't know what else to do. Whoever was below me trying to open the door frantically ran back down the stairs. A few moments later, I heard someone scrambling away into the woods, making a lot of noise as they went. I was a little worried that the person might come back, but I wasn't going to find the trail in the middle of the night, so I stayed. I spent the rest of the night huddled up in the shack, hoping that the morning would come soon. In the morning, before I left the shack, I tried to open the trap door below the carpet, but it was locked, and I couldn't find any other entrance to the bunker below me. There had to be another entrance because whoever was down there had taken off into the woods earlier that night from a different exit, but it was well hidden because I didn't see it. I made my way back to the hiking trail easily. It was easier to figure out where I was going in the daylight, and after a few hours, I was back at the parking lot. I immediately reported what I had found to the authorities, but when they asked for the details on the location, I couldn't give them an exact spot. The area was so far off the main trail, and I didn't really know where it was. I don't know if the authorities ever even looked for the shack and bunker, or if they ever found it. Maybe they didn't take me seriously, or figured it was nothing to worry about. To this day though, I question myself why someone needed a hidden bunker below an old wooden shack in the middle of the woods for. It must have been some sort of extreme doomsday prep type of person, or someone who is up to no good. One of my last years at church camp when I was a teenager, I got a good scare and learned a good life lesson. I was 14, and my friend Tyler and I had snuck out of our cabin after lights out time. We didn't plan to go far, just a short walk around the campgrounds. We wanted to explore a little, talk about whatever was on our minds, and maybe see if we could scare each other. We were bored. We had spent the whole week at camp doing all the usual stuff like hiking, swimming, and the evening campfires. But that night, we felt like doing something different. We didn't realize how dumb it was until it was too late. We left our cabin quietly, trying not to wake anyone, and walked down the path towards the woods behind the camp. The camp was isolated with no houses for miles, no streetlights, just trees and a couple of small buildings scattered around. We knew the camp pretty well, but we had never tried to navigate it in the pitch dark. We wandered for what felt like a while, just talking and laughing in the dark. We figured we'd make it back before anyone noticed that we were gone. But when we turned around to head back, we realized the camp didn't look the same. The trail we had followed into the woods didn't seem familiar. The lights from the cabins were not where they should have been, and the shadows from the trees were deeper, like they were closing in. Tyler and I started walking faster, but it only made things worse. The more we tried to get back, the farther we seemed to get. The trail was different. It twisted and turned in ways we didn't remember. The trees looked bigger and the path narrower. It was like the woods were alive, shifting around us. We tried to retrace our steps, but it felt hopeless. By then, we were both nervous. Tyler kept insisting we'd get back, that we just needed to keep walking, but I wasn't so sure. My mind kept jumping to all the creepy stories we heard at campfires earlier in the week. You know, the usual scary stories about lost campers, strange sounds in the woods, and old legends nobody really believes but still makes you uneasy. After about an hour, we stopped. The woods were thick, and the moonlight barely cut through the branches. There was an eerie silence, like everything was holding its breath. That's when we heard something, a noise far off in the distance. It sounded like footsteps, with the crunching of leaves and twigs breaking. Someone was walking, but not in a normal way. It was like they were dragging their feet. We didn't say anything, but we both knew that we had to get out of there. We started walking again, only this time it was with a sense of urgency. It felt like we had to get back before whatever was back there caught up with us. Finally, we saw one of the camp cabin's lights, faint but visible through the trees. We moved towards it quickly, trying not to trip over roots or rocks in the dark. We finally broke through the trees and went back onto the main path, right in front of the main campfire area. By the time we got back to our cabin, we didn't say a word to anyone. Nobody knew we had been gone. I'm not sure what happened out there in the woods that night, but I know we both felt something wasn't right. It sounds fake, but it was the weirdest sensation ever. It felt like the woods were changing constantly, somehow trying to keep us trapped out there. The weirdest part of the whole night was that I had my watch out there with me, and according to my watch, we had been out there for at least an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. I wasn't sure the exact time we had left, but I know it was for sure over an hour. However, when we got back to our cabin and saw the clocks there, only half an hour had passed. After that, we never went exploring in the dark again at church camp.
This happened after a long and boring day at school. While returning back to my house, I was pretty excited, as it was a Friday, which meant no school the next day. While approaching my house, I noticed that our garage door was left open and the lights were on. My dad had left for a business trip that same day, and I figured that he must have left in a hurry and had forgotten to close the door. I didn't give it much thought, and switched off the lights and closed the garage door. I played some video games and watched a movie. My mom had to go to her friend's house for whatever reason, so I had the house all to myself, and it was nighttime. I went to the kitchen to make myself a drink, and I saw that the garage lights were switched on again. I figured my mother must have gone in there for some reason and had left the lights on, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling that something was wrong. I went into the garage again, and right away, I saw that every drawer in my dad's workshop area had been opened, and many of his tools were laying around. Whoever was in his garage was surely looking for something. I figured that it had to have been my mom, but when she briefly stopped by the house earlier that evening, I didn't notice her going to the garage, and she wasn't there for very long either. I was honestly creeped the hell out by this point. I didn't see anybody else in the garage, so I went back into my house, making sure to lock the door behind me. As I was watching TV, from behind me, I heard the knob on the door that led into the garage start to violently rattle. In a panic, I got up from the couch and stared in horror at the door. After the person on the other side failed to open it, they let out a loud scream and began to viciously pound on the door. I quickly ran upstairs to grab my cell phone, and then I got it into my head that I needed to exit the house before calling the police. I guess with all the adrenaline running through my body, I didn't notice that all the loud bashing noises from downstairs had come to a stop. Upon coming back down, I immediately made for the front door, which I had to go through the living room to get to. Looking back, I probably should have went through the back. I was very lucky, because when I entered the living room, I saw the intruder. He was a very big man and had an axe in his hands, which he had taken from my dad's workshop. The man had his back to me and appeared to be looking behind an armchair in the far corner of the living room. I'm guessing that the TV, which was still playing the movie, masked my footsteps as I entered the room. I didn't go back upstairs. That would have been stupid. I turned around and hastily made my way to the back door. After running a short distance, I called the cops and reported the incident. They informed me that they would be there in 5 minutes. I then went to my neighbor's house, who was a really good friend of my father's, and waited there until the cops showed up. To make a long story short, the police searched the whole house, and just as I feared, the man was nowhere to be found. They discovered that the intruder had smashed through the door in the garage with the axe. It was kind of a flimsy door, and it would have taken him a few good swings to break through it. I called my mom, and she came back as soon as possible. After she heard about the incident, she hugged me and was grateful that nothing had happened to me. I honestly don't know if my dad had forgotten to close the garage door, or if the intruder somehow opened it. But regardless, whenever you leave your house, always double check to make sure your doors are locked and secured, because it's a scary world we live in. A little background information to set the scene. I live in a house that is directly across the street from a cul-de-sac. Beyond the cul-de-sac is the entrance to a forest that stretches on for miles. The woods are pretty dense in terms of trees and bushes. When I was younger, I would love to ride my bike or scooter down various pathways through the forest and back to my house. Since it was a short distance, there was a bit of a downhill slope. One day when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, I was riding my bike down the street that led to the cul-de-sac. There was multiple openings at the end of the cul-de-sac where you could clearly see the forest from the street. I was distracted by someone standing in the woods off in the distance. I wasn't paying attention, and I accidentally ran into a small car that was parked outside one of the houses. It was kind of embarrassing, but thankfully I wasn't injured or anything. The person began pacing back and forth frantically, like they were trying to decide on something. It was then that I noticed that this person was wearing what looked like a black raincoat. He didn't have his hood up, so I could clearly see his head. He was a balding middle-aged man. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think he was talking to himself. I was a bit weirded out, so I hid behind the car that I ran into, and lifted my head just high enough over the trunk so I could still see what was happening. It was then that I saw something in his hand that seemed to give off a bright shine every time he walked under a ray of light coming through one of the overhead trees. It was a knife, and from where I was, I could see that the knife appeared to be stained red. I gathered up my bike and was about to head straight back to my house. When I looked back to where the dude was, I froze. The man had stopped pacing and was now staring right at me. I panicked and dropped down behind the car, letting go of my bike, which made a loud metallic clank as it collided with the street. Not knowing what to do, I waited for about 30 seconds before peeking my head back out from behind the car. The person was still standing there, just staring. Then suddenly, the person started sprinting towards me, letting out a deranged scream, followed by something that I will never forget as long as I live. I launched myself back onto my bike and started pedaling home as fast as I could. When I made it to the end of the street, I turned back and saw the psycho walking back into the woods. When I got back home for dinner, I didn't say anything about it to my parents or my sister. I was afraid that they wouldn't let me ride down the cul-de-sac anymore. I guess being a dumb kid, that was more important than my own safety. It's been about 10 years, and we still live in the same house, and haven't heard about any kidnappings or murders happening around here in the past decade. So I'm not entirely sure what that person was doing out there. Maybe he was just some mentally unhinged nutcase off his meds. Maybe he was a crazed drug addict. Whatever the case may be, I'm glad I didn't meet him and his knife up close and personal. I used to date this guy named Jake. I met him through mutual friends, and at first things were okay between us. But there was something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jake seemed to just kind of show up around places where I would be, without any kind of setup. This happened to me more than a few times, mind you. It was like I was being stalked by my own boyfriend. He gave off this weird vibe that would have been assigned to anyone not to date this person. But to be honest, I wasn't in a very good place in my life at the time. I was very depressed, had a bit of a drug problem, and had very low self-esteem. He knew that, so when he pursued me, I went with it. We ended up dating for about 2 years. About halfway into the relationship, he went to jail, and I ended up having to move in with my parents. When I would make the 2-hour drive to visit him, I began to notice that his personality took a turn for the worst. He became very possessive, and noticeably more uncomfortable in his own skin. The times I couldn't be there, since I always couldn't make that drive to see him, seemed to push him closer and closer to his breaking point. I think something happened to him while he was in jail. When he finally got out, I eventually moved back in with him, and that's when he took a nosedive into hard drugs. One night we had some people over at the house, and he was really overdoing it, if you know what I mean. He kind of went off into his own world. Even when our friends left, he really didn't seem to notice or care. I went upstairs to go to sleep, while he stayed downstairs. I laid down in the bed, and shortly after, I fell asleep. Suddenly, my entire body was shaking. I opened my eyes to see Jake violently shaking me. I looked at him, and I immediately became terrified. His eyes were bloodshot and crazed, and he was panting like some kind of rabid dog. "Where is it?" he barked. I asked him what he was talking about, and he seemed angered by this. "Where is it?" he asked again more aggressively. At this point, my initial fear had passed, and I then became very annoyed at the situation. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, and then I rolled over in bed and tried to go back to sleep. He went back downstairs, and the next thing I know, I hear glass smashing and things being thrown around. I get up to see what's going on, and he comes barreling up the stairs and shoves me to the ground, coming down on top of me and pinning me to the floor. Mind you, I'm only 5'5", 130 pounds, and he's 6'4", almost 200 pounds. I had my phone in my hand, and he pried it away from me. At this point, I'm now horrified all over again. It was like something alien had taken him over. He was looking at me like how a lion stares down their prey. He looked into my eyes, and after a long silence, he said, "Don't tell anyone. Your phone, they can track it. Everyone knows you're here. They can't know you're here." At this point, I start struggling, trying to get away from him. He grips me harder and says 3 words I'll never forget. "I killed someone." After a few seconds, he suddenly lets go of me, bursts into tears, and runs away. I put on some clothes and book it out of the house, running as fast as I could to my car. When I got in and turned the key, I glance over to see him running straight at me. I scream, and before I could put my car into reverse and back out of the driveway, he forced open the hood of my car and pulled something out of the engine. At this point, I realized that I had left my phone in the house. Once he had got done tampering with my car's engine, he shut the hood and left, taking whatever he had pulled out with him inside. I sat there in the car, unsure of what to do. I could see him through the downstairs window. He was looking all around for God knows what. He was so focused on keeping me there and finding whatever he was looking for. As I sat in the car, I started sobbing. The car was still running, but I don't know what he pulled out of it. I didn't want to drive away and have the car break down, so I decided to make a run for it. The neighbors were close by, and all I had to do was make it to next door quickly. I waited for him to be out of sight. I then opened the car door and bolted. As I was running, I heard the sound of shoes on pavement from behind me. I turn, and I see him chasing me. His bloodshot eyes were fixated on me. I was now screaming for my life. I ran to the neighbors and beat on the door. When they opened it, I rushed inside and locked the door behind me. I then braced myself for Jake to slam into the door, but he didn't. I looked out the peephole, and he was nowhere in sight. The neighbors let me use their phone, and I called my parents to come get me. I left my belongings and my phone at Jake's place, and technically the car that I was using was in his name, so I left that there too. I have never spoken to him again. I shudder when I think about his bloodshot eyes staring me down, and the way he chased me down that day. That was the wake-up call I needed to get my together. I called the police and told them what he had said to me, but I never heard any follow-up. I figured that it might have been just the drugs talking, but if I had stayed with him, there's no telling what could have happened to me. My family planned a summer trip to visit my aunt and younger cousin Fred, who was 13 at the time. My aunt's house is a quiet country home surrounded by fields and dirt roads. There were porches on both the front and back of the house, making it look authentically country. Even though we were surrounded by the beauty of the countryside, it didn't take long for Fred and I to become bored. The sun was beginning to go down, the light was dimming, and the temperature was perfect for a stroll. Fred and I decided to take this time as an invitation to sneak out through the field behind the house. The field ended into a dirt road. We walked less than a half a mile, and we could see the dim lights at the parking lot of a small canning factory. By the way it smelled, I figured they probably canned boiled peanuts. We actually walked up to the back of the plant, where they parked delivery trucks for the night. The trucks are the type that have double doors on the back of them, and you only have to open one side to get in. Fred walked up to the back of one of the parked trucks and pulled on the door, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. We climbed right into the back. It was dark and empty. I shut the second door behind us, but I didn't close it all the way, leaving a small crack for a tiny bit of light to come through. Lucky for us, I had my cell phone with me, and I could use the flashlight. Of course, like every idiot teenager, we thought it would be cool to graffiti our own initials on the back of the truck. After we had our fun, and as we were just about to exit the truck, Fred caught the glimpse of someone through the opening in the door. He stopped in his tracks and became totally frozen, giving me a chance to look as well. I could see that a figure was walking across the parking lot opposite the truck. I thought this could have been a security guard. Fred started freaking out and hyperventilating. The man must have heard him because in that moment, he turned around and started walking in our direction. I put my hand over Fred's mouth and we both crouched down against the closed door. My head was flat against the door, with one eye looking through the slight opening. The man was now standing right outside the crack between the doors, only mere feet from us. How in the world he never opened the door, I'll never know. He was looking right through the opening in the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could see his nasty, rotten teeth as he opened his mouth and coughed. Unbelievably, he never touched the doors. He just turned around and started walking towards the entrance of the plant. That's when we made a break for it. With a loud thump, my cousin's feet hit the asphalt. Before I jumped down, we both saw the creepy man standing at a short distance. He was wearing a black hoodie and ripped jeans. There was a large scar on his face from his mouth to his right eye, and I could see his broken teeth twisted into a grin. His appearance was so unsettling that I still have never forgotten about it to this day. I leapt down to the ground from the back of the truck, and that's when the man pulled out a knife. Before I could even get the word "run" out of my mouth, Fred was out of there like a bat out of hell. I truly didn't know Fred could sprint that fast as he left me behind. I then booked it, and the man took off after me. I could hear him growling and yelling profanities at us from behind me. We made our way into the fields, and it wasn't long before I could see the lights of my aunt's house in the distance. I took one last look behind me, and all I could see was a dark hooded figure standing among the tall blades of grass, watching us flee. And even though it had become considerably darker,
I swear I could see the man's deranged smile from under his hood. I made it to the back of the porch alongside Fred, who was gasping for breath. We told our family everything that happened, leaving out the part about us being in the back of the truck, for obvious reasons. My aunt called the police, and after about a half an hour an officer came. They found the man. It turns out he was a former employee of the factory who had been let go because of his severe mental issues. Ever since then, I never go out after dark unarmed. Who knows what would have happened if that lunatic had opened up those doors and found us. Back in the spring of 1999, when I was 16, my family moved to a small mountain town in Colorado. I quickly became friends with the only other kid my age who lived nearby. His name was Kyle. One evening, shortly before the start of summer, Kyle and I had been wandering through the woods and found a narrow river that flowed across the property. Being bored kids, our immediate reaction was to jump in and swim upstream and have fun. We kept at it until sundown. But instead of packing it in, set them down on the riverbank and keep swimming. After maybe another 10 minutes, Kyle became very quiet and gestured for me to swim closer to him. When I was within arm's reach, he whispered to me, "Look over my shoulder, towards the tree line. I think someone is there pacing back and forth." I would have immediately dismissed his words as just him jumping at shadows, but the genuine concern in his voice made me pause. I glanced over to where he had indicated and scanned the tree line for a few wary seconds, but didn't notice anything moving. I said something to the effect of, "It's either an animal or just shadows, dude. No one has any business being on this property, and I doubt anyone else knows about this section of river." That didn't seem to put Kyle's mind at ease at all. He turned back around and looked towards the tree line again, and for a moment, there was complete silence. "Did you just hear that?" Kyle asked. I told him that I didn't hear anything. Kyle asked if I would walk up to the bank with him and investigate to see if there was anything there. I told him if we got out, we wouldn't want to go back in, and I kinda wanted to swim some more. Kyle didn't respond, but instead swam out towards the bank and climbed out of the water. I continued to swim like a moronic kid, oblivious to the notion that me diving forward into the water in the dark could have resulted in me caving my head in on a hidden rock or something. I'm not sure how much time passed before I suddenly began to feel very alone. I turned back towards the bank, and I didn't see Kyle anywhere. Both of the flashlights were still untouched, lying in the sand by our shoes. I called out for Kyle as I climbed out of the water, but he didn't seem to respond. I picked up my flashlight and scanned the trees with the beam. I called out for Kyle again, half convinced that he was just messing with me. But again, silence was the only response. I took a few careful steps into the woods, around the area that Kyle had pointed out earlier. I was getting ready to call his name out again when I noticed him. He was standing facing away from me several yards away, staring deeper into the forest. I walked over to him, but he didn't turn towards me as I moved closer. I shouted something along the lines of, "Kyle, why aren't you answering me?" I reached out to grab his shoulder, but before I could, he slowly raised one hand and pointed a trembling finger towards the shadows. "Can you see that? What is that?" I shined the flashlight at his face. I could see that he was bone white, and his eyes were as wide as sewer covers. I barely noticed it at the time, but one detail I'll never be able to forget was a single droplet of blood running down from his nose. I turned the light in the direction that he was pointing and asked, "What?" It was like time had stopped. My flashlight beam caught a pair of legs in dark pants, and I felt my heart skip a beat. The flashlight felt extremely heavy in that moment, and if I were in any other circumstances, I would have snapped the beam light upwards immediately. But all I could do was slowly raise my arm, as if I was fighting gravity itself. The legs simply kept going, then the torso appeared. When my flashlight traveled all the way up past its chin, it had a very wide and gummy smile. It was the scariest face I had ever seen. I flipped my and dropped my flashlight. I collided with Kyle as I turned, and we both hit the ground. I screamed for him to run,
Then I took off like a maniac back down the river and back up the path we had taken, abandoning everything else, including my friend. I lost count of how many times I tripped. It was at least 6, maybe as many as 10. But I continued to leap back to my feet and kept sprinting, using only the starlight through the overhead branches and the distant glow of indoor lights where my house was to navigate. I didn't say anything to Kyle. I was certain that I could hear him only a few steps behind me, crashing around the sticks just as loudly as I was. I shot through the garage door into the kitchen, screaming bloody murder. My arms and face were bruised and bloody, and at some point, I had lost one of my sneakers. But I barely registered that as I cried for my parents to call the police. I looked around behind me for Kyle, but he wasn't there. Assuming that he had run back to his own house, I asked my parents to call his parents after the police arrived. I was shaking so badly when the cops came, and they seemed concerned that I might have been overdosing on something. Then we got the phone call from Kyle's parents, and they were checking to see if Kyle had come home with me. And the police called in a team of dogs and extra men to scan the area. They located our belongings by the river, but they found no trace of Kyle or the stranger. The search lasted months, and over 100 miles worth of forest was searched, but no trace of him was ever found. To this day, Kyle has never been seen again. There was media coverage at the time, but given that we were in a small town where people get lost in the woods often, I don't know how far the story spread. What is probably the most heartbreaking is that Kyle's family is still without any answers. I live with the guilt of his disappearance every day. I doubt that I'll ever forgive myself for not stopping to make sure that he was behind me. To this day, I'm sure I can recall the sound of his footsteps behind me as I ran, so I don't know at what point he stopped, or if the thing grabbed him. Another thought has crossed my mind numerous times. What if it wasn't Kyle that I heard behind me?